Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house, here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, amen, namaste.
Oath or affirmation. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received a communication from Ms. Emily Janke, MP, member for Coroni Central, who has requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the member seeks is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Prime Minister's questions. Urgent questions. Questions on notice. Questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, there are 3 questions on the order paper for the government to answer, and we shall be answering all.
Member for Port of Spain South.
Question number 1 to the Minister of Education. Given the fact that 5 female students have been formally charged for assaulting a pupil of Holy Faith Convent, Cohort, and the recent spat of violence among schoolgirls, will the Minister advise what measures are being taken to address violence among schoolgirls?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Education takes all instances of school violence very seriously, particularly those involving female students, as in the recent incident at Holy Faith Convent, Cohort. In addressing this issue, we have strengthened several existing interventions as well as introduced target initiatives to address this troubling trend. This includes expanding resources for the Division of School Supervision and Management. The division is a mechanism wherein school supervisors monitor, evaluate, and develop the operation of schools. In increasing its resources and hiring additional school supervisors, the ministry expects more regular school visits by supervisors, which in turn will lead to the identifications of early warning signs of violence, allowing for quicker interventions and proactive support solutions. We have additionally increased the presence of guidance officers and school social workers, who provide individual and group counseling in schools where behavioral concerns have been flagged. I will further examine utilizing Gender and Child Affairs Division to roll out mentorship and conflict resolution programs specifically tailored to female students in high priority areas. I further wish to bring light to the existing services of which I urge parents and stakeholders to take advantage of. The Student Support Services Division delivers an array of psychosocial, educational, and behavioral services for students to provide environments which support their healthy development. The school social workers are equipped to develop prevention programs, assess students' psychosocial needs, and to provide crisis intervention. Madam Speaker, we are deeply committed to creating safe, nurturing environments in our schools and will continue to act decisively to address violence in all its forms.
Member for Laventille West.
Question number 2 addressed to the Minister of Works and Transport. Given that women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities are disproportionately affected by natural disasters, will the Minister inform this House what measures are being implemented to safeguard the lives and livelihoods of these vulnerable populations during this hurricane season?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Works and Transport, in partnership with the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, has implemented a number of measures to protect vulnerable populations during this hurricane season. In 2021, the ODPM launched a digital tool to improve the way we collect and visualize hazard incident data at the household level. Thanks to strong partnerships with the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government and the Ministry of the People, Social Development and Environment, this tool is supporting faster access to post-disaster relief and giving responders a clearer view of hazard impacts nationwide. In fact, earlier this month, the aforementioned ministries conducted training and sensitization sessions for disaster management coordinators and field officers, ensuring readiness for acute needs. Recognizing that women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities are often disproportionately affected by natural disasters, we have strengthened early warning signs, ensuring that alerts are disseminated in accessible formats. The ODPM additionally has utilized social media and created a WhatsApp channel to make pertinent information on disaster preparedness more accessible to the wider population, and will further make efforts to disseminate information that is particular to vulnerable groups. Moreover, the ministry will soon launch community-based resilience training to ensure that at-risk groups are better prepared for disasters. We are also conducting infrastructure audits with special attention to shelters, drainage, and access in vulnerable communities. Several shelters are being designated and equipped to accommodate special needs, including ramps, medical supplies, and trained personnel. Additionally, contingency plans are in place to ensure that transportation and evacuation protocols take into account the mobility needs of these populations. Madam Speaker, protecting the most vulnerable is a core priority, and we will continue to adapt and improve our disaster response system to meet this goal.
Member for Laventille East, Mover.
Question number 3 to the Minister of Sports and Youth Affairs. Why our national women's sports team do not receive the same level of support as their male counterparts, and how this unequal treatment will be resolved during her tenure?
Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for this important question. The disparity in treatment between our national men's and women's sports team is a deep concern that the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs takes seriously. Though it is cultural inequalities which have majorly contributed to this imbalance, we are nevertheless committed to reversing that trend and are resolute in our mission to also undo any structural inequalities that may also contribute to this imbalance. In the cultural aspect, we have sought to revamp the public perspective on women's sports through Pink Rain campaign, which seeks to facilitate the development of women and girls by providing opportunities to increase awareness and participation in the key aspects of sport and physical activity. This has manifested in events such as the #GirlsRunTT challenge, in which 300 women and girls across Trinidad and Tobago participated in various running, walking, and hiking challenges to earn medals. Just this year, we facilitated the Young Women and Girls Sports Empowerment Program, a workshop in which young women and girls in community sports were equipped with essential skills for success such as career and vision mapping, time management, and self-branding and marketing, among others. As it relates to what we have done on a more systemic level, the Ministry is instituting equal funding criteria for national sporting bodies, requiring that they submit inclusive development plans for both male and female teams in order to access government grants. We are also reviewing access to training facilities to ensure our national women's teams are not disadvantaged. Promotional efforts are being scaled up to improve visibility and public support for women in sports, and a comprehensive gender equity policy is being finalized to guide all aspects of sport governance, and investment. Furthermore, women athletes are being prioritized under our Elite Athlete Assistance Program, which provides financial support for nationals who have attained the qualifying international ranking determined by the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee. Madam Speaker, our women's teams continue to make us proud, and they deserve the same level of institutional backing as their male counterparts. Equity in sport is not only fair, but it is essential to national development, and this is a sentiment we seek to honor in our work at the Ministry.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister, public business, private members' business, motions.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas human trafficking remains a critical public issue in Trinidad and Tobago, with the majority of victims being women, minors, and migrants. And whereas the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals calls for the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls in the public and private spheres, including trafficking, sexual exploitation, and other forms of abuse. And whereas digital technology, including social media, is increasingly being utilized by traffickers to recruit, manipulate, and exploit victims. And whereas existing legislation, policies, and agencies have failed to address the critical issue of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago, be it resolved that the government take urgent steps within the next 6 months to strengthen policies, amend legislation, improve law enforcement and rehabilitation capabilities to address the issue of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to present in this esteemed House. Human trafficking is not a distant concept that we only see on our television screens. It is an undeniable and prevalent issue within Trinidad and Tobago. The lives of the vulnerable are stolen, leaving near irreparable damage on families and societies. In our discussions today, let us be reminded that behind every statistic is a cry for help. A human being, our silence and inaction is complicity. Due to an early call for the 2025 general elections and a subsequent change in government, we have been unable to complete our legislative agenda as projected. This would have prioritized the changes that we are requesting today. However, we have made some significant positive strides within our tenure. So, because the government is a continuum, we call upon the government bench to understand the importance of sustained interventions and the need to act quickly. Our anti-human trafficking response is not only in benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, but it is in benefit of the global citizenry. The eradication of human trafficking falls under the remit of SDGs 5.2, 8.7, and 16.2. And Trinidad and Tobago is a state party to the Palermo Protocol, the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons. And Trinidad and Tobago is a Tier 2 state, which simply means that we have made significant improvements to our human trafficking response. However, there is still room for improvement. According to the 2011 TIPS Act, trafficking in persons can be defined as the recruitment, harboring, transfer, or receipt of persons by a means of coercion, abduction, abuse of power, among other means, for a purpose, and that purpose is often exploitation. Anyone is at risk of being trafficked. However, women, minors, and migrants are at a greater risk of being human trafficked. According to a UNODC 2024 press release, it has been stated that women and girls form up to 61% of all cases of human trafficking globally. Therefore, we need to move now. Madam Speaker, as previously mentioned, human trafficking thrives on the exploitation of vulnerabilities, as well as the profitability of transnational crime. Our vulnerable populations are vulnerable due to poverty, as well as the political instability in their source countries and other causes. Although this may not have been the intention of the current government, the cancellation of over 350 contractual agreements has led to over 10,500 CPEP and reforestation workers being left on the breadline with little notice and only 1 month's pay. Thousands of Trinidadians are now placed in a position of economic vulnerability. According to the 2024 TIPS report, it has been identified that traffickers are recruiting victims using job openings on social media as well as the newspapers. Therefore, this new group of unemployed people are at risk of being exploited and falling for deception tactics that are disguised as genuine job vacancies. Therefore, Madam Speaker, we need to act now. The government bench may ask us, why now and why within 6 months? However, swiftly developing technologies as well as the mainstream use of artificial intelligence has presented us with changing circumstances. Our traffickers are utilizing new tools to target the vulnerable and the young. Therefore, we need to amend the way that we act. There have been some significant wins under our current legislation during our administration. We have successfully convicted 2 human traffickers, one of which was a police officer at the time. So this further underscores that this administration will not tolerate public officer complicity in human trafficking cases. They will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But, Madam Speaker, we identify that 2 convictions in 10 years is simply not enough. According to the 2024 TIPS report for Trinidad and Tobago, it has been identified that public officer complicity as well as judicial delay are significant shortcomings of our current anti-human trafficking approach. As MP for Arima, I am charged with the representation of the challenges faced by my constituents. And according to a Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Corporate Communications Unit media release in June 7th of 2022, 5 persons were charged in Arima for the crime of trafficking in children. Madam Speaker, we are now in 2025 and that court is still before the courts. And then we can even examine the most recent case, the most recent conviction. Mr. Valentine Eastman, who was also a police officer at the time, charged in 2013 and only convicted in 2025, where our TIPS Act would have stated in Section 29 that compensation is available to our victims. It's important that we pay attention that this compensation is only made available if there is a conviction. Therefore, Madam Speaker, in the eyes of our victims, justice delayed is justice denied. Moreover, it is inappropriate for us to discuss any situation and any issue affected by a marginalized group such as migrants without bringing their voices and their input to the table. So, Madam Speaker, I take this opportunity to amplify the voice of my constituent, the founder of the La Casita Hispanic Cultural Center in Arima. She states that the Venezuelan migrant population that she serves lives in fear of exploitation when seeking jobs, and that mistrust of the protective services is widespread. This has led to hesitance to report cases of exploitation and also to even testify in court. This means that we need to act to protect this vulnerable group, Madam Speaker. So today I defer to the hardworking members of my opposition bench to highlight our holistic, victim-centered recommendations for the amendment of our approach. We should act together and not divided. The issue of human trafficking should never be politicized. So I appeal to the members of the government bench today that a vote in support of this motion is a vote in support of the most vulnerable in society. I thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move.
This motion requires a seconder. Member for Ruka.
Madam Speaker, I beg to second this motion and I reserve my right to speak.
Honorable members, the motion being second, I shall now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that the government take urgent steps within the next 6 months to strengthen policies, amend legislation, and improve law enforcement and rehabilitation capabilities to address the issue of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago. Attorney General and member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to present on this crucial topic of human trafficking. It is with due regard we address this topic as it affects our women, migrants, and more disturbingly, our children, the very backbones of our society. But, Madam Speaker, allow me a moment before I dive into the heart of my contribution. I want to address certain troubling remarks the Leader of Opposition has made here this morning. You see, Madam Speaker, the Leader of Opposition, with impressive theatrics, has reminded the Honourable House about the dire situation of human trafficking here in Trinidad and Tobago, citing the SDGs we are supposed to abide by, and even citing the scalding human trafficking report that places us on the Tier 2 watch list. However, permit me to read a few words from the motion, as it seems to me the Leader of Opposition has not understood it. And whereas existing legislation, policies, and agencies have failed to effectively address the critical issue of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago. Failed, Madam Speaker, failed. The Leader of Opposition, in our own words, has admitted that the last 10 years was an abysmal failure, a situation that has festered within the last 10 years due to willful neglect and possibly a chronic allergy to change. What is even more laughable, the Leader of Opposition is calling on us, the government, to take urgent steps within the next 6 months. 6 months, Madam Speaker. 6 months suggests to me a blissful ignorance of the legislative process, but I digress. We will be the government that you have failed to be. With your leave, Madam Speaker, permit me to quote the annual report on trafficking in persons by the Counter-Trafficking Unit and the 18th report of the Joint Select Committee published in 2022 and 2020 respectively, which has stated that for the past decade, over 500 persons have been victims of human trafficking, half of which has seen no redress, and this is excluding the number of cases that just has not been reported. But we, the government, we are committed to drastic legislative reform. Firstly, we intend to amend the laws to reflect our international undertakings, as we are a ratified party to a number of important United Nations conventions. For example, firstly, imagine you are a migrant child and you are denied a place of education here in our school system. Well, Madam Speaker, this is the reality for over 2,000 migrant children. And to this I say, had we been compliant with the United Nations Conventions on the Right of the Child, no child will be denied a right to education. And therefore, we intend to amend the Education Act to ensure a migrant child's place here in our school system, of which will be advanced by the Minister of Education. Additionally, Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago, as a ratified party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, it is shameful that within the past decade we have not included the definition of a refugee within our local laws. Madam Speaker, no definition means no identity, and no identity means no human rights. And to this end, we intend to amend the Immigration Act to include the internationally recognized standard and definition of a refugee, to be advanced by the Minister of Immigrant Affairs. Yet again, to be advanced by the Ministers of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, it is again shameful that the previous government, has not sought to ratify more important conventions, such as the Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and the members of their families. Madam Speaker, ratifying and swiftly incorporating this treaty will humanize our migrants, especially in light of the Venezuelan exodus that has touched our shores here. Madam Speaker, on a regional level, we intend to harmonize the Trafficking in Persons Act to strengthen collaborative efforts amongst all CARICOM countries. Secondly, Madam Speaker, in this era of boundless digital connectivity, where there is a growing leash on our youth, Madam Speaker, there is nothing currently existing to protect our children when they peruse popular interfaces online. I don't need to remind you, Madam Speaker, that traffickers, they no longer prowl in streets, they no longer prowl in alleys, but from dark markets to direct messages, these deceivers have gone digital. Within the last year, we've been hearing about a cybercrime act that have yet to fall into place. But to this end, we must do more than talk. But we must empower our judiciary with a substantive online safety and cybercrime act, alongside expanding search warrants to include digital material, just as the United Kingdom has done and just as New Zealand has done. Madam Speaker, I don't need to remind you that phones and social media accounts, they hold more evidence than any locked drawer ever could. This will be advanced by the Ministers of Public Administration and Artificial Intelligence and the Minister of Justice and Legal Affairs. Thirdly, Madam Speaker, to address the dockets that are bursting at its seams, this government intends to implement and operationalize a special trafficking in persons court to ensure that each victim will have their day in court and have their case be heard without being suffocated behind a backlog of cases. Additionally, Madam Speaker, I would like to ask you, why is it that such a crucial part of the problem, the office of the DPP, remains under-resourced? From overworked state councils to laughable salaries, the members of the opposition bench has exacerbated this problem beyond measure, of which swift remedy will be dealt by the Minister of Justice and Legal Affairs. Finally, Madam Speaker, to strengthen our law enforcement response, we intend to amend the Trafficking in Persons Act to improve higher fines and life imprisonment for those involved in human trafficking rings. But make no mistake, this is not only for the layman, but for those corrupt police officials that are known to engage in sex trafficking rings and prey on the vulnerable. We intend to tackle the issue of police complicity by having a periodic declaration of assets. And yet again, we intend to amend the Trafficking in Persons Act to include the internationally accepted standard of the non-punishment principle. Madam Speaker, as the government, as the judiciary, and as law enforcement, it is our duty that we do not worsen a victim's plight. Madam Speaker, to this end, while there are low-hanging fruits in the form of existing policies and action plans, of which will be advanced by the Minister of Social Development, rural and local government, and the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development. To this I say, 6 months is not enough. Instead, a catchment period of 12 months will be more appropriate to implement all sweeping legislation reforms that this government intends to pursue. In closing, I would like to say, Madam Speaker, and to the members of my opposition, we are not here to repeat the past. We are here to rewrite it. I thank you.
Member for Digo-Martin Northeast.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I listened to my friend on the other side, and I listened very attentively as she made mention of amending the Education Act to allow for migrants to be integrated within the system. But, Madam Speaker, I would like to put on the record that this has already been done in the Immigration Act. An amendment has already been placed in the Immigration Act. Madam Speaker, my friend on the other side also said that the existing legislation has failed. And while we agree that there are some failures within the legislation, we cannot undermine some of the pertinent legislation that this side has brought forward with regard to the protection of our vulnerable in society and with regard to the administration of justice. We brought forward the Domestic Violence Act, the Sexual Offences Amendment Act, and the Administration of Justice Indictable Proceedings Act, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me talk a little bit about the AJIPA, because the AJIPA is very crucial in our fight against human trafficking. More than just allowing for the efficiency of convictions, it introduces the concept of anonymous witness statement and remote witness statement. And this is crucial because it addresses the issue of low victim participation, where victims of human trafficking are afraid to speak up. They are afraid. And this is what this side has done. Madam Speaker, let me now move to my substantial contributions this morning. This morning, I want to put forward 3 important issues to this debate. Firstly, the urgent need to amend the Trafficking in Persons Act, the urgent need to bring forward new legislation, and lastly, the need for policy reform in relation to how we treat our migrants. Smuggling. Madam Speaker, there is an urgent need for smuggling to be included within our legislation. Because smuggling is very similar to human trafficking, and oftentimes it morphs into human trafficking. Very recently, we saw on a Newsday article dated April 13, 2023, a Venezuelan was smuggled into this country under the guise that she would be given employment, but instead, Madam Speaker, instead, she was made a prostitute. And yes, the 4 men who were responsible for this heinous crime, they were charged with offenses relating to human trafficking, but no offenses relating to smuggling. And Madam Speaker, that means that there is a gap and we need to fix it, and we need to fix it now. I move on to my second point, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I heard my friend, the Attorney General, mention that the traffickers are online. I did not hear her say a cybercrime act. I did not hear her say a media act. Madam Speaker, there is an urgent need for a cybercrime and media act. We know that the human traffickers are online. We know that they are using legitimate ads via the newspapers. So when are we going to act? Are we going to continue to play blame game? Are we going to continue to point fingers? Madam Speaker, according to a media release by the Judiciary, dated November 3rd, 2023, our very first human trafficking case involved a 16-year-old national of Trinidad and Tobago. And she was lured by her victim via a legitimate ad in the newspaper. So this is not foreign to us. It happens right here. And it tells us that the media needs to take accountability. And the media needs to take accountability now. They need to put measures in place to work hand in hand with law enforcement. They need to ensure that all ads, all suspicious ads are reported, and that every single ad placed is done so by a legitimate business. These are the measures that we need to put in place. Because you know what? It's not just about borders. It is about browsers and media accountability. Madam Speaker, I move now to my third and final point, which is the need for policy reform in relation to our migrants. Madam Speaker, we see foreigners come to our borders either legally or illegally under Section 8 and 9 of the Immigration Act. And they are sent back because perhaps they would have been charged with offenses relating to prostitution. And we have to question whether it is we are punishing victims or criminals, and we need to do more. Madam Speaker, when the law is weak, nobody wins. When the law is weak, human traffickers win. And the vulnerable in our society, they lose. With that, I thank you.
Member, your time has expired. Member for Couva North.
For the opportunity to speak. I, Brianna Lawrence, the Minister of Justice and Legal Affairs, and the Member of Parliament for Couva North, rise today not only as a member or a minister, but as the guardian of rights, dignity, and freedom of every citizen in this country. Before I begin, I would like to just comment from my friend on the opposition bench. She stated that we did not mention a cybercrime act, but I think it laughable because my friend, the Attorney General, did mention. So, my friend, you are quite well not attentive. But I hear your concerns about legislation, new legislation, and policy reform. Today I stand and I say enough is enough. It is time for bold action, unwavering justice, and new legislation. Madam Speaker, as traffickers increasingly exploit digital platforms, we will expand search warrants to include digital material and the dark web. Section 13 of the TEP Act states and covers physical warrants. However, as this crime evolves, so too must our laws. So we will extend Section 5A of the AJIPA Act to include these warrants and the dark web. These warrants will be specific, time-bound, proportional, and balanced with privacy and public safety, as we know privacy is key. We will also be modeling Section 41 of the UK Police Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 2022, where it states that personal data can only be accessed to consent and when necessary for official duties. As I move on to my second point, Madam Speaker, we will and intend to implement a specialized human court to deal with these offenses exclusively. The judiciary has already taken steps towards this. However, we will fully accelerate and operationalize this court. This court will have specially trained judges and a victim support system to ensure that justice is never denied or delayed. Thirdly, Madam Speaker, the office of the DPP, it is our gatekeeper of justice. And how is it that a crucial institution is operating with one hand behind its back? The DPP is overlooked, overburdened. There are chronic underfunding, staff shortages, and so much more. But we will equip the DPP with human resources by hiring prosecutors and legal staff, by revising their salaries and modernizing their technological resources, as these are the individuals who will help us bring forth justice. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, through these points I highlighted here this morning, I will say that this bench, this government, this ministry is not sleeping. We are awake. We are ready to fight. I thank you.
Member for Diego Martin Central.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable members, my question today is, how long? How long will our victims suffer in silence? And that's the question that I have to ask today. In 2024, we identified 31 victims of human trafficking. And behind each of these numbers is a human story of undeniable pain and suffering. As Minister of Parliament for Diego Martin Central, I stand before this House today with a sobering truth. despite the 2011 Trafficking in Persons Act, with 15 to 20 years imprisonment, there were only 88 persons charged and 2 convicted under this legislation. Madam Speaker, only 88 charged and 2 convicted under this legislation. The U.S. State Department report exposes our implementation failures. We have strong laws on paper, but our victims are suffering because our system, it is failing them daily. Madam Speaker, the Valentine Eastman case, which dragged from 2013 to 2025, 2013 to 2025, proves that strong laws means nothing without the proper enforcement mechanisms in place. We face a misclassification epidemic where domestic trafficking cases are persecuted as simple abuse rather than trafficking. We must strengthen Section 16's exploitation provision by adding specific definitions for forced labor in domestic work, theft bondage, forced marriage, and organs trafficking. Yes, organs trafficking. We must expand Sections 22 to 27 of the TIPS Act, the enforcement mechanisms to include assets freezing power, search and seizure authority, and the ability to conduct undercover operations to eliminate corruption in these systems. Madam Speaker, basic needs remain unmet, with our detention conditions failing Sustainable Development Goals 3 standards. We must revolutionize our victim support by implementing the proven 4P strategy: prevention, protection, persecution, and partnership. Because currently we only have one specialized NGO, Families in Action. We need to expand NGO partnerships beyond current limitations. And as my colleague from Diego Martin's Northeast would have mentioned to the government, and I would like to re-emphasize and expand. They said that we haven't done anything within our tenure. However, the Practice Direction number 12 of 2023 was implemented as a specialized criminal court for human trafficking matters. Our authorized officers, such as the police, Coast Guard, Immigration, and Defense Force, they need the proper counter-trafficking training. And now I'd like to speak to the traffickers. The love of money is the root of all evil. Repent, because the depths of that evil represents human trafficking itself, the depths. And it is not just about human trafficking, but it's about the suffering and the exploitation behind it. The suffering and the exploitation of these victims. And while an effective reporting system exists between the Financial Investigations Unit and the Counter-Trafficking Unit, guided by a memorandum of understanding with the Financial Investigations Branch, we're not fully leveraging these coordinated efforts. We need to expand these connections with enhanced asset fortitude that hits traffickers where it hurts the most, their profits. Madam Speaker, this isn't about politics, it's about human dignity. Every day we delay, more victims, they suffer in silence, their documents destroyed, their identity erased, Madam Speaker. How long? How long? And that's the question that I have to ask today. Our victims cannot wait for perfect solutions. They need our action now. And I thank you.
Thank you. Members, please be reminded of Standing Order 4410, which dictates that members should not read his or her speech without the leave of the Speaker. So please be guided by Standing Order 4410. Member for Point Fortin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I heard the member for Diego Martin Central mention that only 2 was convicted. But let me remind her that was under their government with their legislation. Madam Speaker, this is a government that stands on principles. Today is a new dawn. A dawn where the government of Trinidad and Tobago, when we identify an issue, fearlessly, strategically, and justly, we are going to confront it. Madam Speaker, that brings me to the first problem, and permit me to quote with your leave. According to the U.S. Department of State's 2024 Trafficking in Persons report, corruption and official complicity in trafficking crimes by some in the police and national security services, including at more senior levels. Madam Speaker, therefore, this calls for rectification. And therefore, we would be dispersing officers at every cardinal point in Trinidad and Tobago. There would be a 24-hour shift system. It means that we would always have men on the ground. There would be nowhere to run. There would be nowhere to hide. Madam Speaker, they are going to be specially trained and specially selected, and they are going to be tasked with an aim. And that aim is to investigate corruption in relation to human trafficking, secure and rescue victims. And Madam Speaker, when we rescue these victims, we are going to be working in collaboration with the Minister of Social Development to place these victims in shelters. And our own specially selected and trained officers are going to secure those shelters, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this brings me to my second point. We are going to investigate the assets of these officers. Nobody gets away. Not the police, not the Coast Guard, not the Air Guard, neither the regiment, Madam Speaker. And if these assets do not align with their income, they would have to account for how it was obtained. This is going to be done by an independent and impartial body. That would be the Police Complaints Authority, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and if these human traffickers believe for a second that they are going to transfer the assets to anybody else's name, they have another thing coming, because we would be investigating that too. We would be monitoring them online. Our officers at each cardinal point is going to be monitoring them, Madam Speaker. Our investigators is going to point them out. So, Madam Speaker, just like bungee galling, we didn't come here to stand up. We came here to work, Madam Speaker. And that brings me to my final point, trust. We would be working with the CTU and the Ministry of Social Development to ensure that we identify who these victims are. We are going to implement policies. We are going to implement programs, self-defense training. And if those human traffickers believe for a second that they are going to threaten the families' victims, we are going to protect the victims of the families of those victims as well, Madam Speaker. It is time for those human traffickers to pick on somebody that is their own size. Tell them, do not threaten the victims and their families, threaten us, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, so I would lift up my gun. I call her justice. And I would aim with precision, and I would load her up with effective strategies and policies, and I would squeeze the trigger of legislation on them, Madam Speaker. I would burn their skin, unlike the opposition, who only shoots from their mouth. Madam Speaker, and permit me to send a message to those human traffickers. Run, pray, hide. Judgment Day is here. And look at me. I am your worst nightmare. Thank you, Madam.
Member for Orangwell St. Joseph.
Madam Speaker, I, Gianna Horsham, the Minister of State for National Security, representing Orangwell St. Joseph, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important debate on the matter of human trafficking. Madam Speaker, we can all agree this is not a distant or abstract problem. It is here and it is growing. According to the United States 2024 Trafficking in Persons report, Trinidad and Tobago identified 34 victims of sex trafficking, all Venezuelan migrants. Madam Speaker, these are victims who entered our borders illegally, not by choice, but by desperation and force, through unguarded coasts and underground networks. As such, our initial plan will be to defend our greatest challenge, that being border control. Within the first 3 months, we will increase patrolling in areas like Cedrus that are considered to be high risk for means of illegal and undocumented points of entry. For the next 4 months thereafter, we will be implementing drones and gradually other forms of technology to assist patrolling so that it can be an ongoing remote process. Importantly, Madam Speaker, as mentioned by the Attorney General, we will, within a 12-month period, amend the 2011 Trafficking in Persons Report, which states in Section 31, Madam Speaker, please permit me to read, where a victim has been compelled to engage in unlawful activities as a direct result of being trafficked, and he has committed any immigration-related offence or any other criminal offence for which he is being prosecuted, he may offer as a defence evidence of having been compelled as a victim of trafficking to engage in such unlawful activities, end quote. Instead, we will adopt international standards and enforce the non-punishment principle so that survivors are not criminalized for acts committed as a direct result of being trafficked. Madam Speaker, our response must not simply be one of security, but it must be rooted in humanity. Please permit me to read a quote from the 2023 United States Trafficking in Persons Report, which states, "Victims of severe forms of trafficking should not be incarcerated, fined, or penalized solely for unlawful acts committed as a direct result of being trafficked." Take the case of Manuela Molina, a pseudonym name, who arrived on Chaguaramas Beach on the 26th of July, 2019. Madam Speaker, please permit me to read an article from a report from the International Organization for Migration that states, minutes after her arrival in Trinidad and Tobago, her freedom was taken away. Manuela recalls, "Some people kept us in captivity for about a month. They forced us into prostitution. In trying to escape, I ended up getting arrested. I was in prison," end quote. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, we intend to take a very hard line for any officers found complicit of being in violation of this non-punishment principle. In the interim of this amendment, any officer found complicit will be sanctioned. However, once this amendment is completed, any complicit officer will be found guilty and will be facing severe and hefty fines ranging in millions, as well as jail time ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. Moreover, Madam Speaker, to prevent this from occurring, we will be implementing a specialized enforcement unit whereby law enforcement will be given trauma-informed training so that they do not criminalize or re-victimize our survivors of human trafficking. However, Madam Speaker, let it be known that this government is one that has been taking action, as will be expanded by the member of Tunapuna later on. Madam Speaker, please permit me to read a quote from the Friday, the 6th of June of this year by Ryan Hamilton Davis in the Trinidad and Tobago Newsday, which states, "A human trafficking ring was busted in Tunapuna, rescuing 12 Venezuelan women, a minor and 2 children, and seizing weapons and over $150,000 TT dollars." Similarly, Madam Speaker, please permit me to read a quote from Saturday, the 7th of June this year from Trinidad and Tobago Guardian that stated, 45 held as 2 human trafficking rings busted. It also stated that 45 people across Trinidad is one of the country's largest coordinated crackdowns to date, end quote. Madam Speaker, trafficking thrives in fear, in silence, in loopholes. This strategy is our declaration that those loopholes will close, that survivors will be protected, and that perpetrators, no matter who they are, will be held accountable. In closing, Madam Speaker, this government will ensure that our system of investigation is one which acts with integrity, is aware of our duty, and will not prosecute victims if they do choose to come forward. Let us reaffirm our national and moral duty to protect the most vulnerable in society, uphold the rule of law, and protect the rights and freedoms of every individual within our borders. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Clarkston Bay.
Madam Speaker, I thank you for affording me the opportunity to share my contribution. Madam Speaker, as my friend, the Minister of State, was just saying, human trafficking thrives where our systems are weak, where oversight is lacking, and where a blind eye is turned to corruption, something that has been happening in this country for far too long. Madam Speaker, for years, we have seen a vehicle registration and inspection system riddled with loopholes. Loopholes exploited not only by human traffickers, but other serious criminals. We are seeing vehicles passing inspection without ever being physically checked. We are seeing duplicate chassis numbers being approved. We are seeing youngsters receiving their driving license without physically writing the registration exam. No more, Madam Speaker, that is not going to be allowed to happen anymore. Madam Speaker, permit me to reference an article from the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian, written by Charlene Rampasad on February 20th, 22, titled "Stolen Vehicle Scam Uncovered at Licensing." Madam Speaker, in this article, the Transport Commissioner, Clive Clark, acknowledged the depth of corruption in the vehicle inspections process, stating that it was a system where someone could receive a sticker in a rum shop. Madam Speaker, as a Trinidadian, I feel nothing but pride when my fellow men excel and dominate the sporting arena. But with each passing day, it's becoming abundantly clear that the sport we excel most in is tennis, because apparently racket can't done. Madam Speaker, in January 2025, a ghost pirogue with five decomposing bodies was found drifting off the coast of Trinidad. Similarly, in 2021, a similar incident occurred near Tobago involving African immigrants. Madam Speaker, we must acknowledge that these vessels are in connection to human trafficking. These vessels are more than likely being used to move victims of human trafficking, and we have no formal knowledge of their existence, their ownership, or their movement. Madam Speaker, we have to call it what it is, a broken system. And a broken system does not just inconvenience citizens, it endangers lives. And that is why this government shall not be treating it as a matter of administration that can be resolved overnight. It is a matter of national security, and that is how it will be treated. Madam Speaker, while everything is very serious, there is nothing more serious than the cracks in our unregulated PH taxi sector. Madam Speaker, permit me to remind you of Ashanti Riley and Andrea Barrett, two of hundreds of women who got into what they believed to be taxis simply trying to get home, possibly trafficked and found murdered. Madam Speaker, in response to this, this ministry shall be adopting a localized model of the Blue Lightning Initiative launched through the December 19, 2024 Memorandum of Cooperation between Airports Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Department of Transportation. We propose training our frontline transport personnel, our PH&H taxi drivers, our maxi taxi operators, our water taxi operators, to detect and report human trafficking to the counter-trafficking unit in real time. Madam Speaker, this approach that we are proposing is not just about taking care of fraud in licensing office. It is about closing off escape routes used by criminals. And that is why we are collaborating with the Ministry of National Security to identify and improve infrastructure in high-risk zones, ensuring that roads are passable and easily accessible by the armed forces, law enforcement, and rescue operation. As you can see, Madam Speaker, this is a whole-of-government approach, to addressing a deeply entrenched issue. We intend to we intend to confront every issue, to seal every crack and close every door. And we have a message for the traffickers. Your routes will be blocked. Your networks will be dismantled. The tides of impunity are dropping. Your days of drifting in the sea of injustice unnoticed has come to an end.
Member for Trin City.
Madam Speaker, esteemed colleagues, human trafficking is not some distant crime. It is a brutal, growing reality happening here, preying on the most vulnerable amongst us. Trinidad and Tobago continues to serve as a source, a transit, and a destination for trafficking victims, especially women and girls. This fact alone should disturb us. Madam Speaker, our borders remain one of our greatest vulnerabilities. And while there has been some progress where the Coast Guard now supports the CTU and Immigration Division, among others, trafficking still persists. With over 30 official ports of entry and dozens of unofficial landing sites, it's our coastlines that remains dangerously porous. Because of this, Madam Speaker, I urgently think we should expand our radar systems, deploy our unmanned aerial vehicles, and increase our Coast Guard patrols. Our immigration officers, as well at high-risk areas such as our airports, must also receive targeted training as well as regional cooperation through agencies such as CARICOM Impacts. Madam Speaker, border control alone is not enough, because once inside our country, victims are moved through our highways, our ferries, and other transportation networks. Why? Because there is no coordinated system in place to identify these suspicious activities. Thus, Madam Speaker, I propose the immediate rollout of a national transit security protocol supported by mobile unit enforcement and digital watch lists. To my other point, Madam Speaker, we cannot ignore the corrosive role that corruption plays. According to the US 2024 Trafficking in Persons report, they have exposed troubling allegations with our law enforcement and our immigration officers being complicit in trafficking rings. Yet very few have faced accountability. Thus, Madam Speaker, the Police Complaints Authority must be empowered through our legislation to investigate independently these cases within stricter timeframes. I take very seriously these allegations, Madam Speaker, of our border agencies, as integrity must be our first line of defense. We therefore need to introduce stricter oversight, anti-corruption training, and a secure reporting mechanisms for all whistleblowers. Now, Madam Speaker, in the middle of these investigations lie the CTU, and while they remain very committed, they are still overwhelmed and under-resourced. As of 2022, it's investigated just 8 of the suspected cases due to a lack of staff. And as of 2024, only 15 full-time officers. This is inadequate. We must therefore double its capacity, establish regional sub-offices, as well as invest in forensic and cyber tools. Now that leads me to our victims, Madam Speaker, with our judicial system. Despite efforts to expedite these trials, many victims tend not to testify due to fear. Fear of retaliation, fear of deportation, and fear of abandonment by this very system that is meant to protect them. I strongly advocate for amendments in the Trafficking in Persons Act to guarantee more long-term immigration relief, access to legal counsel of their choice, and safe and remote options for testimony. Madam Speaker, I must say the opposition has bright ideas, bold statements, but a lack of a plan. Within the next 6 months, we have the opportunity to move from reactive measures to a proactive national strategy, one rooted in compassion, one rooted in justice, and one rooted in security. Let us not be remembered as the parliament that hesitated. Let us be remembered as the parliament that defended the voiceless. For the dignity, security, and freedom of every human being in this nation, I stand by this motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, forgive me, but those on the other side have already squandered enough time while they were in power, and I don't want to waste this illustrious House's time any longer, because human trafficking victims deserve us delving straight into solutions. As social media use skyrockets among children and teens, traffickers are adapting, using fake identities, grooming tactics, and algorithmic reach to prey on the vulnerable. The internet, for all the good it has given us, has become these sick traffickers' hunting ground, but it is also where we are going to start fighting back. According to the Trafficking in Persons Report 2024, published by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes on December 11th, 2024, 52% of detected victims in Central America and the Caribbean are girls under 18 and women another 30%. These numbers would soon include a case that was presented involving a 15-year-old girl who was lured into human trafficking through what appeared to be a legitimate online job posting. Madam Speaker, while our current legislation addresses many facets of human trafficking, there is a glaring absence of specific legal framework governing the use of technology in these traffickers' schemes and in the fight against them. Let it also be noted that there is currently nothing in place to protect our youth online. Based on a study by Sandy Lamotte for CNN Health on November 9th, 2019, 90% of children have already held a screen by the age of 1. With Gen Z dominating the demographics regarding internet usage and Gen Alpha following closely behind, I deem the Global Digital Compact's call for social media platforms such as Instagram and TikTok to safeguard their young users completely valid and necessary. Acknowledging this, we intend to implement 2 plans when it comes to the protection of not only our citizens, but others residing within our borders. By utilizing AI grounded in key machine learning methods, we can help law enforcement and the counter-trafficking unit spot patterns, flag suspicious behaviors, and analyze image and video more efficiently. This will mirror the Global Emancipation Network's use of AI in the analysis of online job postings to identify potential victims of sex trafficking. The advantages of integrating AI in this fight include increased efficiency, adaptability, and better scalability. And with how quickly these traffickers are known to change their tactics, staying ahead of them is crucial. But AI systems built to detect and help solve sensitive cases require careful development, proper data, and ethical safeguards. These tools are powerful, yes, but they are not instant. Our plan also includes the introduction of a cyber and data safety initiative centered around educating and empowering families to protect youth online. While most social media platforms set the minimum age at 13, it is well known that these age restrictions can be bypassed. A UK report by Ofcom revealed that 80% of 12-year-olds already have social media accounts. Now, rather than relying solely on legislation, our approach centers around equipping parents and guardians with the knowledge and tools they need to guide healthy digital habits and build a safer, more informed digital environment for future generations. Through nationwide workshops, online resources, and school-based programs, we aim to raise awareness about the risks of early access to social media, the importance of screen time balance, and practical ways to implement parental controls and foster open dialogue at home. Human trafficking is evolving, and so are the tactics. They used to lurk in the shadows, now they hide behind screens with fake profiles, hashtags. Now, thanks to AI and technology, we are going to pull back the curtain by spotting victims faster, dismantling networks smarter, and responding to danger in real time. Before I end, I'd like to reiterate what MP for Trinity said. She said, urgently think. Madam Speaker, we are going to urgently act. Thank you.
Member for Tabakit.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Imagine being promised your dream job online, in modeling, entertainment, or even sometimes public service, only to find yourself trapped, exploited, and silenced. As the Minister of AI and Public Admin previously mentioned, social media has become one of the main weapons for communication. It is the traffickers' digital hunting fields, if you will. And this is not it. What is the root cause? It is vulnerability. The economic insecurity, especially young youth and unemployed persons. For them. Madam Speaker, please allow me to quote from the 2021 annual report on trafficking in persons in Trinidad and Tobago. It states that social media is now the main way for people to interact in modern societies, and traffickers are exploiting that. Fake job ads on platforms like WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. They are luring people in, especially among the job seekers, the youth, into dangerous situations under the disguise of opportunity. In fact, the report shows that of 79 selected court cases, 44 involved online advertisements, affecting 278 out of 491 victims. These aren't just shady back alley schemes, Madam Speaker. They were ads promoting luxury in careers like modeling and entertainment. They were carefully coded and hidden behind legitimate sounding employment. The second major issue is the disruption of public servant training, particularly the frontline transport and immigration workers. According to the same 2021 report, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted the training of staff in 2021. Even worse, Madam Speaker, the U.S. Department of State published a trafficking in persons report for Trinidad and Tobago. Permit me to quote. It says the government did not demonstrate overall increasing efforts compared to the previous reporting period. The government conducted fewer investigations, identified fewer victims, and has never convicted a trafficker under its 2011 anti-trafficking law. And without trained eyes on the ground, Madam Speaker, victims pass undetected through our borders every day. So what do we propose? 2 AI-driven, powerful, innovative solutions. First, a national AI job match system. A government-managed platform connecting those individuals at risk and connecting them to verified, safe employment. Users create a profile. The system uses AI to match them with legitimate employers, all pre-screened and all in compliance with the anti-trafficking standards. But it does not stop there. The AI can flag high-risk individuals, for example, someone facing recent financial hardships, and refer them to job counseling, social services, or emergency support. It is prevention through empowerment, Madam Speaker. Second, we propose the centralized AI-enabled e-learning platform to not only resume but modernize staff training. This system will give all public agencies, from immigration officers to bus drivers, access to standardized, real-time victim detection training. Workers can engage in AI-powered simulations that replicate real-world trafficking scenarios and receive instant feedback to improve their skills. Plus, training will be updated automatically, noting new trafficking methods and ensuring no one falls behind. Together, these systems work hand in hand. One to catch the trap before it even starts, and the other to catch it before it slips through, Madam Speaker. Let us not wait for another report of failure. Let us act now with smart tools, secure systems.
Member, your time has expired. Member for Laventille West.
Honorable Minister, esteemed colleagues, today I stand before you not only to debate this issue of human trafficking, but to demand action, real, meaningful, and urgent action against this stain in our society. Because every minute we delay, we fail those who need us most. Madam Speaker, before I delve into my points, it appears that the member for Oropouche East is so focused on political blame game that she has failed to hear the many successes that we have outlined. While shortcomings must be addressed, we must work together as no single government has ever made a perfect solution. Which brings me to my first point, AI digital surveillance for trafficking networks. As the opposition leader would have mentioned, human traffickers are no longer recruiting victims through our physical spaces. They are now recruiting victims through TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and even job recruiter profiles. According to the Trinidad and Tobago Counter-Trafficking Unit Annual Report 2020, several cases have revealed that digital grooming and false job offers were initial contact points. One notable example occurred in 2020 when 3 Venezuelan girls were lured via WhatsApp, promised domestic jobs, but instead were forced into sex work in my very constituency of Laventille West. However, our law enforcement agencies lack the technical tools to proactively detect and dismantle these operations. Due to this, we propose that the government invest in an AI-powered system capable of analyzing publicly available data with catchphrases such as easy money, travel opportunities, or patterns of targeting young women and minors, identifying bot accounts or fake recruiter profiles, and flagging potential trafficking rings for human review. All of which would be legally justified under the Trafficking Persons Act Chapter 12, Section 18, which allows authorities to carry out investigation and collects evidence. Which brings me to my second point, predictive analytics for victim risk mapping. Permit me to read, Madam Speaker. Currently, the government lacks data-driven tools to identify who is most at risk where interventions are needed. Reports by the Counter-Trafficking Unit have shown that migrant women and children, especially Venezuelans, are overrepresented amongst victims, yet public services are not targeted to prevent them. Madam Speaker, this is absurd. In 2019, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service had a press release entitled 19 Venezuelan Women Rescued in Central Trinidad. The police raided a bar in central Trinidad and found 19 Venezuelan women who were trafficked and forced into sex work. Many of these women were undocumented and desperate for work, and moreover, they had no support after being released, which highlights the failure to anticipate and intercept high-risk zones and groups. As the MP of Digger Martin Central would have said, if not now, then when? We as the opposition proposes that the ministry should deploy a machine learning models trained on previous victim case files, geographic location of reported trafficking activity, demographic data, and online behavioral patterns. This system, Madam Speaker, would then propose a risk map highlighting high-risk zones, vulnerable groups, and potential trafficking events. This would furthermore align with Section 15 of the Trafficking Act, which emphasizes preventative action and need to inform policy with evidence. Permit me to speak now on public administration, institutional weakness, and poor interagency coordination. Under the Trafficking in Persons Act, the government has designated agencies such as the CTU, Immigration Division, Police Service Child Protective Unit, and Social Development Ministry, yet multiple reports, including from the U.S. State Department of Trafficking in Persons report, have highlighted the disjointed and under-resourced response by these agencies. Victims fall through the cracks due to bureaucratic delays, Madam Speaker, duplication of duties, and poor information sharing. In 2022, the U.S. State Department in Trafficking in Persons report Trinidad and Tobago, following the rescue of several underage girls in South Trinidad, police were forced to hold victims in a station for 2 nights because there were no shelter space or immediate communication with social services. I as Shadow Minister, I take a stand against this. We propose a public sector task force on human trafficking, which includes all key ministries and law enforcement units, which has a centralized, digitalized case management system to track victims and services. Such reforms would reduce delays in victim support, improving prosecution rates, and enhance Trinidad and Tobago's international credibility on human rights compliance. Madam Speaker, let us not be remembered for our speeches, but for decisive action that saves lives and restores dignity. As our national anthem proclaims, here every creed and race find an equal place. It is our solemn duty to ensure that equality and justice extend to every vulnerable soul in our nation. Thank you.
Member for Princestown.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to bring my personal belongings with me. Otherwise, I would have given some Q-tips to the member of Laventille West for repeating the things that our Minister and our Minister of State have mentioned in their presentation. She's suggesting that we do monitoring. Our Minister mentioned a cyber and data safety initiative. She's suggesting every single thing that our ministers have stated. Now, to my friends. Madam Speaker, do you know what my favorite street is? It is Memory Lane. In April 2011, Brigadier John Sandy introduced the TIP bill into Parliament. In June 2011, it was passed. In January 2013, it was enforced. And as a direct mandate of the Act, the National Task Force was created, the CTU was established, and we started public awareness campaigns. Now, unfortunately, I do not have my West Indian readers with me, so I can't spell out what that means to my friends on the other side. Now, on a possibly contradictory note, I would like to thank the members of the opposition for the work that they've attempted to do. For example, the AJIPA was fully proclaimed in December 2023, but we still face challenges because on day 8 of a women's leadership seminar, the Honourable Justice Hudlin Cooper in June 2025 mentioned that her case docket starts at 150 cases. Now, those aren't 150 trafficking in persons cases. The TIP case can be number 73, but the 72 before require their due process. And that is why I'm really excited and thrilled about what our government has proposed in the sense of a special court for human trafficking. This was even recommended by the Joint Select Committee of Human Rights, Equality and Diversity in 2024 in an article published in March in the TNT Guardian newspaper. Now, when in our research, when we've looked at countries with a similar economic profile, for example, Thailand, they established their special court for human trafficking just 7 years after their Anti-Trafficking Act was enforced. Now, what that says to us is that it can be done. We have an example that we can establish a court. Now, while I may not have a ministerial portfolio, Madam Speaker, I proudly represent the constituency of Princestown. And it was in this constituency that a Princestown police officer, Mr. Valentine Eastman, was convicted for human trafficking. And what the US State Gov reports consistently state as an issue preventing us from moving up in the assessment status of our human trafficking management capabilities is official complicity. Even though that was just one conviction, Mr. Valentine Eastman, what that says to us is that we have proof that our laws can work once we use the system correctly. And what our government intends to do is ensure that there are barriers to entry of our protective services personnel by doing thorough audits of their finances. Because let's be honest, Madam Speaker, you cannot be driving a vehicle that has the same monthly installment as your salary. That is absolutely absurd. Now, in addition to everything our team has mentioned so far, we also intend to tackle the low-hanging fruit. And you would hear at least 11 strategies of what we intend to do within the next 6-month period to catch and target those issues. We intend, Madam Speaker, to finish what we started in 2011. Now, the opposition has brought forward this motion because they need our help. They've admitted that their legislation has failed, and I agree that's a mature stance to take. But what I believe, Madam Speaker, is that we can do more together. We can accomplish more together. And I'm going to close with the motto of our sweet, sweet Twin Island Republic. Together we aspire, together we achieve. We aspire to see a land where women, children, and girls are safe And I believe, Madam Speaker, we will achieve.
Member for Tunapuna.
Firstly, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to contribute to this debate. Before I go on to add, I just want to raise 4 points brought by the opposition. Diego Martin, Northeast, said that there are amendments to Section 8 and 9 that are required for the Immigration Act. Diego Martin Central said time to fix the problem and bring human dignity and don't bring politics. Trinity said to support the CTU because there's a lack thereof. And my good friend in Lavantil West said, pour into agency. But, Madam Speaker, allow me to firstly thank my Prime Minister for seeing that this Ministry of Immigrant Affairs, and newly minted, be best fit to help address these issues. Madam Speaker, I am here to simply advocate not to go against the opposition's motion. We are here to say time will be our greatest ally. Allow me to make a presentation here to tell you about our existing laws that currently exist here in Trinidad. Again, the Immigration Act of Trinidad and Tobago, and I would like to bring mention to you about the Refugee Convention, in which Trinidad and Tobago is a ratified, signed member of the 1951 treaty. Madam Speaker, we are here to now bring to you why granting refugees protection is important. You see, the Honourable Member for Trinity would have said the lack of support for CTU. I am here to also include that our interagency ministries will sign a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, through the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Civil Aviation and Transportation, and key ministries along this government bench. We are here to support this motion, but it is only going to be possible with the advocacy of time. You see, members of this Honourable House, refugees are not defined in our Immigration Act. Let us be real about it. We have so many members and different nationalities coming to our shores. We are very aware of the migrant crisis that exists right by our regional neighbours, Venezuela. You see, Madam Speaker, as the Honourable Member of Tunapuna, I want to also bring attention to right here in my constituency in St. Vincent Street. There was an article that was previously mentioned by members on this side of the government on June 7, 2025 by the Trinidad and Tobago Newsday. Operation G-Ride, a 6-month undercover sting that rescued 12 women. These women, Madam Speaker, were 21 to 28. One was discovered, was 16 years old, a child. These persons are Venezuelan nationals who are no older than any of us who are sitting here. It brings the question to the table, when persons are here who are from another country, especially those who do not speak the same language with us, are we looking out for them? You see, Madam Speaker, it is important for me to make mention when we do not include in our laws refugee protection, what we leave for these vulnerable group. You see, Madam Speaker, we leave them with two very, very unfortunate outcomes. The first unfortunate outcome is they stay here and they could risk being deported. When they don't have the protection of us, they will be deported back to their homeland and they will face travesty. The second outcome, which is even more worse, is they remain here unprotected and they are being susceptible to human trafficking. We do not present two great options here at all. You see, because we signed this convention in the year of 2000, which means we have not done really much to advocate for the change. Again, it is important for us to note that we can do something about it. You see, I would like to also make proper definition that a migrant and a refugee is two different. Let's not confuse it. A refugee is here probably by force because they are fleeing a crisis. A migrant is here by freedom of movement. The choice is solely theirs. You see, Madam Speaker, these risks without proper protection only leaves one option remaining here for us. We must make amendments to the immigration law. My government, you will see us in further discussions here today. We will push to advocate for proper legislation. We will endorse interministerial working partnerships. We are here to also ensure that United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 16.2, which supports the eradication, the ending of human trafficking, violence to women, girls, and children. I thank you for allowing me for this contribution. Thank you.
Member for Aruka.
Madam Speaker, thank you. The government believes we have the luxury of time on our side. However, Madam Speaker, newspaper headlines tell a different story. Please permit me to read. January 27, 2025, Guardian reads, decomposing bodies found off boat on Trinidad's southeast coast. And I'm happy to hear the member for Clarkson Bay mention the incident on May 30, 2021, where she said that African victims were found in Tobago. Now, these were not just African victims. These were persons from Senegal and Mauritania. I know for the viewing public, today may be the first day they hear mention of Mauritania, a country 3,500 miles away from Trinidad and Tobago in West Africa. Madam Speaker, what does that say? That this is not an isolated event. That signals that this is a disaster of transnational reach, whereby the criminal networks involved in human trafficking and smuggling have now reached our shores. It's not just in our oceans and seas, it's in our own backyard. Just last week, Sunday, Express reports 8 suspected human trafficking victims rescued in St. Helena. Last week, all female, Spanish-speaking, 2 were minors. Madam Speaker, if decomposing bodies and incidents of rescued victims doesn't move this House to urgency, crap will smoke we pipe. Global unrest, wars, climate change, poverty is pushing people into desperation. And when desperate, the trafficker steps up, not as a threat, but as a savior. So how do we respond? We don't respond with fines and jail time and lifting up the matic of justice. We respond with just, compassionate, victim-centered legislation. This solution requires an integrated response across ministries to help those genuinely fleeing danger. Safe legal pathways to migration allows the vulnerable to seek protection, Madam Speaker, and allows them to stay out the hands of the trafficker. So what does this look like? I agree with the Member of Parliament for Tunapuna. There needs to be amendments to the Trafficking in Persons Act. And as my colleague said in Trinity,
Member, please be reminded of Standing Order 4410. Please proceed.
Thank you. And as my colleague said in Trinity, we need long-term immigration relief. So what does that look like? It looks like repatriation. It doesn't look like repatriation to our home country or simply stay in Trinidad for the duration of your proceedings. According to the IOM model legislation, permit me to read, on Caribbean counter-trafficking model, state parties are allowed to adopt legislative measures to permit victims of trafficking to stay in the territory temporarily or permanently, or identify a third country for them to grant longer-term status. This is the type of legislation we need, Madam Speaker. And I agree with the Member of Parliament for Faizabad. It is high time we incorporate the 1951 Refugee Convention into domestic legislation. Victims fearing persecution should not be sent back to where they come from. Under international law, the concept of non-refoulement is a cornerstone whereby these persons should not be sent back to where they come from. And most importantly and most alarming recently, the closure of the UNHCR signals to us that these victims of trafficking, who may be asylum seekers and refugees in this country, would not have access to determination or recommendations by an international body in here in Trinidad and Tobago. So what does that mean? We need the legislation. Madam Speaker, let us be a chamber that works together. We're not here for the legislative back and forth.
Member, I'm on my legs. Thank you. Your time has expired. Member for Couva South.
Thank you for recognizing me, and allow me, before I add my contribution to this debate, to address the concerns of the opposition, particularly our member for Aruka, who highlighted that we do not have the luxury of time, forgetting that they had the luxury of 10 years and failed us. But call us Bob the Builder if you may, but rest assured we will be building Trinidad and Tobago for the future. Allow me to add that I too was almost snatched on the streets of Port of Spain at the tender age of 13. And that grim reality that could have been my life drives my passion here today to advocate for the lives of the vulnerable and all potential victims of human trafficking. As the Minister for Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, while I agree with the intent of this motion, I must highlight that as it stands, it's incomplete and overly simplistic. And I say that because this motion makes no mention of CARICOM, no mention of the Palermo Protocol, which we are party to. It fails to highlight our regional trafficking routes, despite the fact that many victims here are foreign nationals. And it doesn't take into consideration the much-needed international cooperation for us to make this a success. Any motion on human trafficking that fails to incorporate these diplomatic mechanisms and regional realities is, quite frankly, short-sighted and not worthy of this august chambers. And I say this with great respect. But the opposition must wheel and come again, because even with the best of intentions, if you do not study for the exam, you will fail the test, which is why they find themselves on the opposition bench here today. A better approach would have been for the opposition to raise this critical issue on a better collaborative framework, such as a Parliament Joint Select Committee on National Security, where we could have had collaborative conversations and include our key stakeholders outside of the parliamentary system, unless the opposition is just about grandstanding, which I pray and hope is not the case, because far too much is at risk. But rest assured, we are not waiting on a motion to begin acting. We are finalizing the National Action Plan on Human Trafficking as reinforced through our works with CARICOM Impacts, and we continue to coordinate bilateral relations with international agencies such as the IOM, and not forgetting our key partners for security, the United States of America, the European Union, the British and the Canadians. Madam Speaker, while we can agree that migration enriches the very fabric of our Caribbean civilization, there's a deeper conversation which must happen here today with urgency, and that is the ratification on the International Convention for the Protection and Rights of all migrant workers and their families. And I tell you here today that this treaty seeks to provide and guarantee basic rights such as access to medical care and fair treatment. It allows for the protections of victims of human trafficking so that they are not at risk of being arrested, providing them a pathway to speak up. It also aims to strengthen legal accountabilities in sectors prone to abuse, all while aiming to protect and prevent re-trafficking. And I tell this House here today that I'm working assiduously with my Attorney General to ratify this convention, something that the opposition failed to do in their time here. But allow me, Madam Speaker, through you, to also remind the opposition that Trinidad and Tobago leads the responsibility for security in the CARICOM Quasi-Cabinet. And it is in this regard we will be hosting a regional TIP summit right here in Trinidad and Tobago to analyze and harmonize our regional policies and frameworks, and also to lead the conversation for all CARICOM member states to sign on to the Migrant Workers Convention.
I trust my colleagues on the other side can understand the importance of executing this summit with due care and not rushing to tick a box in a few months just for mere publicity stunts to say that we are working. But, Madam Speaker, this is not a debate about timelines. This is about lives. It is about Manuela Molina, who was abducted and forced into prostitution and then arrested when she tried to flee. Madam Speaker, she, the victim, was arrested. Rush justice can often lead to blatant injustice. It is about Michael Anthony Smith and a 16-year-old girl who is employed in his bar under false pretense, one of our very own, who was forced into prostitution. This isn't just numbers. These are names. These are faces. These are futures ruined. Madam Speaker, we, the government, welcome the passion of the opposition, and we ask that they match it with precision and good sense to work with us, not against Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Member for Mayaro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to say that I find it very rich for my colleagues on the other side to demand that we take action within the next 6 months. Suddenly, they've developed a sense of urgency so intense you think that they just discovered trafficking yesterday. Is it that by sitting on the left side of the House, Madam Speaker, they can now see through clearer lenses? Or is it that they now see a government who is capable and competent enough to address such a fragile issue of human trafficking? It's like the saying goes, when you can't handle your own show, you just try to steal the spotlight in somebody else's show. But I digress. As it stands, Madam Speaker, the Trafficking in Persons Act, Chapter 1210, criminalizes all forms of trafficking, ensures victim protection, and holds offenders accountable. However, this government is ready to review this act, not in isolation, but with consideration of a uniform legislation across the CARICOM region, so that all legal frameworks are aligned. This will allow for the improved enforcement and standardized sanctions. We will also ensure that it meets international standards and the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically SDG 5 and 16. These changes will mirror those of Germany, who have recently adopted similar amendments and seen measurable improvements. These amendments include enhancing prosecutorial powers, increasing minimum sentences for traffickers, and improving victim compensation and witness protection. Further, in Trinidad and Tobago, the CTU is responsible for investigating all human trafficking cases, coordinating victim protection and public awareness. But these efforts could be profoundly heightened through increased regional cooperation. Hence, part of the government's focus over the next few months, would be on advancing similar CTU structures across the CARICOM body. This will allow for a standardized skill set among officers, ensuring that all units are equally trained to identify, investigate, and respond to human trafficking cases efficiently and collaboratively across borders. We are also advancing discussions with regional counterparts on the development of safe houses throughout the Caribbean, offering protection and support for victims despite the country in which they are rescued. This will also facilitate the safe repatriation and rehabilitation of victims, which are both essential to meeting our obligations under the Palermo Protocol. However, these improvements require budgetary allocations, training, and cross-sector collaborations, all of which realistically demand more than 6 months to implement effectively, Madam Speaker. Because 6 months, Madam Speaker, let's be real, these are the same people who took over a year to add an extra lane on the highway and now want to come and dictate timelines for national reform. It's either they think we're in a fairy tale or they figure that governance is not a magic show. So when they come here shouting urgency, Madam Speaker, I say they're urgent now because they were idle then. But this is not to say that we do not intend to make any progress within 6 months, but the magnitude of changes required demands more time to ensure that our legislation and measures for combating human trafficking are equipped to act decisively and sustainably. Finally, Madam Speaker, the need for the unification of regional anti-trafficking laws is another critical area that warrants attention. Because according to the 2024 United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Global Report, approximately 44% of trafficking victims globally are trafficked across borders. This is further highlighting the transnational nature of this crime that flourishes on legal inconsistencies and enforcement gaps between neighboring countries. Therefore, Madam Speaker, it is in Trinidad and Tobago's best interest to advocate through CARICOM for the unification of trafficking legislation, as this will strengthen regional prosecution and help prevent Trinidad and Tobago and the region from becoming a target or a hub for traffickers due to loopholes in legislation in neighboring countries. Also, Madam Speaker, the member Faruka mentioned some MATIC. The Minister of National Security said policies is what she is shooting them with. She is fighting for the victims. Did you not hear her talk about security? This government is one for the victims. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Tobago West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to deliver one message. Failure to act decisively on human trafficking invites not only domestic consequences, but international condemnation. Trinidad and Tobago is bound by Sustainable Development Goal 8.7, which requires that action be taken to eradicate human trafficking. The purpose of the Trafficking in Persons Act is to give effect to the Palermo Protocol, which imposes 3 obligations: to prevent and combat trafficking, to protect and assist victims of trafficking, and to promote cooperation among states in meeting these objectives. The United States 2024 State Department Trafficking in Persons Report upgraded Trinidad and Tobago to Tier 2 status after 3 consecutive years of being deemed Tier 2 watch list. While this is an improvement, it means that Trinidad and Tobago still does not meet the required standards for the minimum required standards for the elimination of trafficking of persons. It places this country's efforts to correct the identified shortcomings under international scrutiny. A demonstration of intensified efforts within the next 6 months would solidify the improved tier placement and indicates continued commitment to our obligations under the Palermo Protocol. Madam Speaker, according to the Ministry of National Security's 2022 Trafficking in Persons Report, Trinidad and Tobago is predominantly a destination country. The aforesaid State Department's 2024 report also noted that transnational organizations use Trinidad and Tobago as a transit hub for exploitation throughout the region. The report also noted that victims are at times taken to Tobago during the tourist season. There is therefore a need for cross-border cooperation. In this regard, I propose that the following collaborative strategy be adopted. General collaboration on the issue of human trafficking through CARICOM impacts and international partners are crucial, but they are, by themselves, inadequate. In addition to these efforts, it is recommended that Trinidad and Tobago seek strategic partnerships to address the shortcomings identified in the 2024 United States State Department report. Such areas include proactive victim identification and screening, protection among vulnerable communities, and the need for improved trust between the counter-trafficking units and non-governmental organizations. The report on the Regional Trafficking in Persons Committee Forum 2024, published by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, highlighted best practices in the region in these areas. These include the proactive screening policy in Barbados, whereby non-nationals who are detained for drug trafficking at air and seaports are automatically screened. And Suriname, a country which has achieved Tier 1 status, has successfully collaborated with local women's organizations to identify vulnerable individuals and raise awareness on human trafficking in remote communities. By adopting regional exemplary practices, Trinidad and Tobago can lead the way by action for a more coordinated response to human trafficking in the region. In conclusion, our obligation under the Palermo Protocol, our role in CARICOM, and our recent Tier 2 ranking all converge on one truth. We are being watched, measured, and expected to lead. This is our chance not just to improve rankings or satisfy protocol, but to reaffirm our commitments to human dignity on the world stage. I thank you.
Member for La Hawketta Talparo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand before this honorable House not just as a minister, but as a daughter of this soil who is committed to protecting and supporting the vulnerable of our nation. There are moments in this chamber that shouldn't just test our fancy politics, but our heart for humanity. And today is one of those moments. So, Madam Speaker, when I hear the opposition say that this government has failed, may I ask through you, have they ever walked with a victim? Or have they ever looked into the eyes of a teenage girl who hasn't spoken for 3 weeks because trauma has stolen her voice? Madam Speaker, I have seen firsthand what trauma does. Therefore, I understand what recovery demands. Despite the narratives being painted, this ministry has taken bold and deliberate steps that is fully aligned with the Sustainable Developmental Goal 5, which states that we should protect all our women and children from all forms of abuse. And this ministry is doing that and has done that, and we will continue to do that. Within the last 8 months, over 100 human trafficking victims received counseling, psychosocial support, trauma-informed care, as well as legal support. We have built 5 shelters that is victim-centered, specifically for our women and children. And we ensure that our victims and survivors are placed in protective care where we ensure that food and shelter is provided. Madam Speaker, we are in close collaboration with the Children's Authority, whose main goal and focus is to protect our children, and they ensure that specialized care is followed. Our Social Development Division, they ensure that survivors are enrolled in vocational skills or life learning skills, and we also support them to build businesses. So while I get that the motion is asking or call on us to strengthen our response, what I must say is that strengthening must be an ongoing process. It must be an ongoing, evolving process, not a timeline. So, Madam Speaker, that is why I see the need for us to strengthen our community, especially our communities at risk. Before I held this ministerial portfolio, I was an assistant social worker, and I had the heart, but we lacked the resources. And when I see the influx of Venezuelan children or migrants that start growing in my community, it was heartbreaking knowing that we lack the resources to even help them. So that is why I stand here today to say, moving forward, I would ensure that our NGOs are given access to grants quickly. And I also welcome stakeholders to partner with these NGOs, to partner with village councils, for us to do more outreach, to teach them what red flags are. Because maybe, perhaps, one of the Venezuelan children, immigrants, probably could have been at risk of human trafficking at my time being an assistant social worker. And me lacking the resources, or even the youth club leader lacking resources, we just turn a blind eye. The most we could have done was contact the police or contact Children's Authority, and sometimes the process may be even longer, that put them at more risk. So I stand here to say that my main goal as Minister of Social Development is to ensure that our communities are strengthened, to ensure that our schools within our communities understand what vulnerabilities are and understand what red flags are. Madam Speaker, I am deeply committed because our NGOs and Village councils are usually the first point of contact, and they are the standard bearers within our communities. And human trafficking hides in the silence and cracks in our systems, and is our community who is the sealants that hold us together. Thank you, Madam.
Member, your time has expired. Member for Malabar.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to demand that the government's 6-month plan addresses the systematic failures that our survivors face daily. Now, first of all, I would like to address something that the government seems to be lacking, which is research, apparently, because as the AG had stated that we are the Tier 2 watch list, no, we are Tier 2. So, as per the 2024 TIP report for Trinidad and Tobago. And guided by that same report, I would like to propose to the government 3 critical steps to focus on helping survivors, which is to institutionalize survivor-centered rehabilitation, to make social grants accessible without identification documents, and to address the law enforcement complicity and gendered abuse. Victims are often re-traumatized by the very systems that are supposed to protect them. As the Minister for Social Development has clarified, there is a heavy reliance on non-governmental organizations. But as per the 2024 report for trafficking in persons, it states that these shelter staff are not properly trained to care and identify victims. There needs to be a national framework for survivor care to protect, train, and that does not rely on non-governmental organizations such as Families in Action to refer and to follow up on the progress of victims. When the opposition was in power, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services did draft a manual for social service providers, but it awaits cabinet approval. We now call on the government to review and employ this manual, and to also establish state-led rehabilitation centers staffed with professionals who are trained to take care of victims. Now, Madam Speaker, if the government is truly committed to protecting victims of human trafficking, it must address one of the key issues that creates risk factor, which is the lack of public assistance to those who do not have legal status. The primary victims are undocumented, and they are considered refugees and asylum seekers as per international bodies. Now, what do you think the experience of a young, undocumented Venezuelan girl searching for betterment would be? Well, it is grim. At least without food, healthcare, and housing, she's basically served on a platter to traffickers. Articles 21 and 23 of the aforementioned 1951 Refugee Convention states that we are required as signatories to provide housing and health care to victims of to refugees. But as these rights remain absent from our domestic laws, these victims are vulnerable to victimization that could have otherwise been prevented. We call on the government to remove documentation barriers and to institutionalize access to social grants, particularly for victim migrants who do not have access to the identification documents. Madam Speaker, it cannot be said that human trafficking will be eliminated as long as authorities are shielded and public officer complicity undermines justice for victims. With all the cases mentioned by my esteemed colleagues, I would like to say that it cannot be said that this is isolated cases, but clearly symptoms of a systematic problem bolstered by Caribbean machismo, especially within male-dominated institutions such as the police service. Allow me to read. According to Dr. Keith Nurse at a forum addressing the social implications of masculinity, our current ideologies must be inspected as they have a major impact in terms of crime and violence. The MP of Point 14 stated that there will be more men on the ground, but I fear that they themselves mean who the victims have to hide from. citing a case from April 2023 where a Venezuelan woman was beaten and sexually exploited by Coast Guard officials, right? And upon looking at whether or not there was some sort of play, the case was dropped. Research studies across the region show that men equate masculinity with control and violence. The opposition proposes that specialized seminars and continuous training sessions be offered to state agencies such as the police and immigration through partnership with the UE Institute for Gender Development Studies, as they have led the research.
Member, your time has expired. Member for Orukut West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you, I would like to recommend to the opposition my doctor, because they seem to be struggling with selective hearing loss. Things already mentioned by the members on this government bench, they are reiterating and stating that has not been said. Let me be more specific. The MP for Aruka spoke about prosecution, but did not the Minister of State of National Security speak about the non-punishment principle pertaining to the persecution of migrants, that would not occur? Additionally, for the MP of Malabar, let me inform you, as of right now in Trinidad and Tobago, the CTU has already installed standard operating protocols in July of 2023. As of right now, we are trying to work in partnership with them to roll out bilingual standard operating protocols. Therefore, we do not need a national framework. It already exists. To the Leader of Opposition, she says, we need to act. But allow me to decrypt that message for you. Through you, of course, Madam Speaker. They needed to act, but they failed. And we, as the government here, are acting and will continue to. It is no fact that as humans, we do not understand the horrors of real-life scenarios until it strikes too close to home. But we cannot wait for that moment to act, and we will not. Moving forward, as the Minister of Women Affairs, we are not only trying to respond, but to prevent. Because why are women, migrants, and minors the demographic of vulnerability? What is happening? We must now reframe the question and focus on demand protection, centering, allow me to repeat myself. We must focus on the protection of women, children, and migrants, trying to reduce their vulnerabilities as they exist. So that would mean by 2026, we will establish a variety of skills training programs to target 500 women annually. And that is especially for communities in rural areas. Also, 5 new shelters that would have standardized 24/7 care dedicated to women with children. Because we understand that when violence and human trafficking is perpetuated to women, it's also perpetuated to their children. There is now a high risk and high prevalence. The likelihood is now increased. We are also going to ensure the training of workers. Of course, this is Trinidad and Tobago, and we as a government are going to aim for change and commit to it, unlike some people we know. We are also going to ensure that there are vocational programs tailored for the current labor market, especially in the field of technology. We understand that we have brilliant young girls who are excelling at the secondary school level. However, there are barriers and challenges to tertiary level. If they choose not to attend tertiary, awesome. We are going to make sure that you can have an improved living despite from what your ancestors endured. Also, we are ensuring that there's an enhancement of social assistance, of course in collaboration with the Minister of Social Development. And even when I mention training, allow me to mention the Minister of Health as well, because we are going to train frontline workers, whether it be doctors, because violence is a sign. It can almost be an indicator that human trafficking is happening and occurring right in front of us, under our noses. It was even mentioned that this is not a foreign issue, and we agree, but we have not been blind to it. We have on our seeing glasses. And not only are we seeing, but we have vision for a bright future for our women and girls. Pertaining to the Minister of Education, we also plan to collaborate once again, because we understand that prevention means that there must be an accessibility of information and knowledge, whether it be to communities and even school visits, to build awareness about what are some indicators that you can be human trafficked or even recruited? To raise awareness of what is human trafficking. It is not snatching you up from the street, you know. It's not that. It can happen with an unpaid bill, a single mother trying to feed her children, a daughter trying to fund herself through schooling and not trying to put a burden on her parents. That is how it occurs. But also for the migrant who is seeking a better life, who's been promised. This is what is happening before us. It is not a simple fix. I snap my finger. Abracadabra. It isn't that. This is a layered, multifaceted, nuanced issue, and one in which we must understand. Listen, it was even stated by the leader of opposition that she's calling for collaboration. But if she truly understood collaboration, then the opposition will not call and set an arbitrary deadline of 6 months. For long-lasting change, you want 6 months? We can give you outcomes, but for long change, sustainable foundations to be laid, we need more time. Thank you.
Honorable members, this House is now suspended until 1 p.m.
Member of Parliament for Caroni East.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this extremely important topic. As the Member of Parliament for Caroni East and the Minister of State in the Ministry of Women Affairs, I fully endorse the amendment proposed by the Honourable Attorney General to extend the implementation timeline to 1 year.
Madam Speaker, I want to speak today not just as a minister, but as a young woman from the Caribbean. Imagine being just 15, walking down High Street after school in uniform and hearing grown men whisper what they'd like to do. Loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to deny. And the minute you speak up about it, oh, you're too sensitive. You post a picture online, you're asking for attention. And don't talk about if you dress up. Well, you looking for trouble. Madam Speaker, I am certain every woman in this chamber has experienced it. Whether it's a stare that lingers too long, a comment dressed up as a compliment, or the weight of silence that follows us after we speak up. If this is what is happening in public, in broad daylight, imagine the silence of the women who are being trafficked behind closed doors, exploited not just with chains, but with debt, fear, and shame. Madam Speaker, we are tracing this monstrosity back to the perpetrators, and we are focused on shifting the blame from the victims to real accountability. Madam Speaker, I say this proudly. Our approach is unapologetically gender responsive. Not because we exclude men, we actually support boys and men. But the data, the reality, and the victims tell us that trafficking is not gender neutral. The Ministry of Women Affairs is committed to working closely with the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Social Development to reinforce the counter-trafficking unit, accelerate victim identification, and establish trauma-informed referral systems that do not re-traumatize survivors. Madam Speaker, these women are not statistics. They are human beings who deserve safety, healing, and a future, regardless of whether or not they ever appear in a courtroom. Too often, support is conditional, tied to testimony or cooperation. But what about the woman who cannot speak? What about the migrant domestic worker who is trapped behind closed doors, or the woman in the agricultural sector too fearful of deportation to seek help? Madam Speaker, are we going to ignore them simply because they are silent? The Ministry of Women Affairs says no. Guided by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goal 1, no poverty, 5, gender equality, 8, decent work, and 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, we will form community-based legal aid clinics and trauma-informed support groups run together with faith-based organizations and local NGOs. In partnership with the Ministry of Justice, we will also find ways to make the justice system feel less intimidating and more survivor-centered. Additionally, we would launch women-focused skills training, particularly in Central and South Trinidad, with free childcare and transport stipends, helping women learn practical skills that they can use to monetize and escape poverty. Madam Speaker, through you, I ask this honorable House and this nation, can we afford to turn a blind eye towards the most vulnerable among us? The Ministry of Women Affairs will not. This government will not. Madam Speaker, we are here not just to close the legislative gaps, but the doors traffickers have walked through for far too long. Thank you.
Member of Parliament for Laventille East Morville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to present in this pertinent debate today. Madam Speaker, human trafficking in our nation remains a scourge that disproportionately affects women, girls, and migrants. Because, Madam Speaker, It is not enough to speak about this issue with empathy. We must act with urgency, because behind every statistic is a girl who never came home, a woman forced into silence, and a migrant stripped of her dignity. Madam Speaker, let us begin with the most glaring failure. There is still no effective national gender-based trafficking strategy. None. And what is the excuse? The opposition has been in power for the last 9 years. Madam Speaker, human trafficking isn't a Johnny-come-lately issue. It isn't an issue that just developed while we were in administration. Madam Speaker, women and girls have been sold and trafficked for decades and are still being trafficked right now. According to the 2024 TIPS report, approximately 149 women and girls have been sold and trafficked and sexually exploited in the year of 2021 and 2022 alone. We've committed to the UN SDGs, yet we're failing SDG 5.2. Madam Speaker, new government, no updated strategy, no urgency. That's not change, Madam Speaker, that's cowardice. Secondly, the failure does not end there. The gap in the immigration policies continues to punish the very people that should be protected. Madam Speaker, women who survive trafficking are often too afraid to come forward. And Madam Speaker, who can blame them? When they do, they either face detention, criminal charges, or deportation. Women are being weaved into the web of human trafficking because of their existing vulnerability. Madam Speaker, the criminalization of these victims re-victimizes these women and girls. As I cipher the case from the newspaper Express, let me remind this House of the 11 women who were rescued in Mount Lambert on the 24th of October 2024, who were held against their will and were being sexually exploited night after night after night. Or just last month, where a human trafficking ring was raided in Tunapuna and 17 persons were held, including a 16-year-old and 2 babies. 2 babies, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to pose a question to the government bench through you. How would you feel if this was your mother, your niece, or even your daughter? Because, Madam Speaker, this is the harsh reality. Where is the care? Where is the revised plan? This is not protection, Madam Speaker, it's persecution. Lastly, Madam Speaker, when we talk about protection, let us not ignore the elephant in the room. The state of our shelters remains strained. Madam Speaker, during our tenure, we've worked with several organizations to properly accommodate traffic victims. And in March 2024, we obtained, not the MP for Oropuch East, they didn't obtain no shelters. We obtained the first government shelters for adult trafficking victims, as it states in the 2024 Persons Report. So that I would like to say the MP for Oropuch East, wheel back and come in. But Madam Speaker, it is July 2025, and many of these facilities are still unfurnished. We also partnered with the Children's Authority to support trafficked young girls. The first migrant transition home was opened in 2023, but in September of that year, it was shut down. Madam Speaker, and these vulnerable girls were then placed into government-funded homes. And in these said homes came reports of rape, sex trafficking, and evil abuse that led to fatal deaths. How can we call this protection, Madam Speaker? These safe houses are the way that they are due to the lack of funding and resources. Because, Madam Speaker, these NGOs and organizations, they can't do it alone. It is not solely up to them to do all the heavy lifting. So, Madam Speaker, I say is enough. Enough blaming and enough treating the opposition like sorry. So if we had to really address this singing issue in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, it calls for all hands on deck. All sides working together, every political party, every organization working hand in hand. If we really want to address this issue, it calls for all hands on deck. Because, Madam Speaker, trafficking isn't just a criminal justice matter. It is a matter of gender justice. Because every girl pulled from a brothel is a reminder that our prevention system still needs work. I thank you.
Member of Parliament for Maruga Tableland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to participate in this debate. Before I continue with my contribution, I would like to say to my Member of Parliament for Laventille East Morvant that cowardness does not stop at 10 years. Trafficking has been going on for years, yet they failed to do any substantial work to protect them. But it's the government's fault, right? And for the Member of Parliament for Cuba South, she shared her story. Or perhaps they're too stuck on their speeches to recognize it. Madam Speaker, before continuing, I would like to bring into perspective a missing reporting case from the TTPS media reports, September 15, 2024. A 14-year-old girl and a 1-year-old boy were reported missing to the Cuba police station in Trinidad and Tobago. Days later, Madam Speaker, they were found in Scarborough, Tobago. We ask, how did they get there? We do not know. And Madam Speaker, that is the tip of the iceberg because according to the Trinidad and Tobago Daily Express on December 8, 2024, 76 young people still go unaccounted for. We ask, where are they and who are they with? Madam Speaker, and all we get in return is silence. And silence in the context of there are many youth who return, and there is no response as to where they were during the days of absence. And Madam Speaker, as I hear the opposition side speaking, I hear hypocrisy disguised as urgency, because these cases just didn't appear overnight, nor did these youths just appear last night. But what's even more infuriating is that the blame falls on us when they had the power to protect these youths. And might I add, Madam Speaker, under this government, structure will arrive before tragedy. And I, Gabriela Gray, Minister of Sports and Youth Affairs, stand on this, that sports is not just a pastime hobby, nor is it just something that children or school students do after school, but it's a prevention tool to crime. Moreover, it helps sustainable development goals of this nation. And in response to that, we will be implementing more sporting facilities within rural communities. Moreover, we'll be refurbishing current sporting facilities. Might I add as well, we'll be including the migrant youth into the National Youth Policy of 2025 to 2030, because we all understand that trafficking does not target one nationality, but it targets vulnerability on a whole. And saying that and ending that, Madam Speaker, we understand that events and activities within communities can only do so much. However, this ministry intends to implement more policies regarding sports in schools, as well as engaging the youth, because that's where they are at. And on this note, Madam Speaker, I end. The youth of Trinidad and Tobago, they are our heartbeat, and under this government, we will not let this country flatline, and I thank you.
Member of Parliament for St. Anne's East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this pertinent debate today on human trafficking. And before I begin with my contributions, I would like to address the Member of Parliament from Muruga Tableland, who stated that the opposition is being hypocritical. But I do not believe that to be true, because it is not the opposition that is speaking about urgency, but then insisting to take steps within 12 months. It is the government bench. They insist that the Member of Parliament for Oropuch East would have said that they don't want to squander time and that traffickers quickly change tactics and they need to urgently act. How is 12 months urgent action, Madam Speaker? Furthermore, Madam Speaker, the issue of social media that was addressed by the Member of Parliament for Oropuch East and the Member of Parliament for Tabakit, while they acknowledge that youths are the ones who are mainly targeted via social media, which coincides with a report by the Counter-Trafficking Unit, which states that 70% of trafficking victims are lured via social media, they insist still yet that they want to take action within 12 months. However, this is not possible, because as they would have stated, they change traffickers change their tactics quickly. And the Member of Parliament for Mayaro would have asked, how many more victims? Now imagine in that 12-month timeline, Madam Speaker, how many more victims will there be? Thus, action needs to be taken within the next 6 months. And I would like to draw to the attention of the Minister for Sports and Youth the issue of sports trafficking. Now, this is a new and emerging phenomenon. And I would, if you allow me to read, a Newsday article published on 16 April 2021, which addressed 2 young footballers who were stranded in the UK, and they were lured there under the pretext of lucrative contracts. Now, we do not have any confirmed cases of trafficking through sport. However, we must be proactive and put stringent measures in place to ensure that sporting agencies and bodies who come with these sports scholarships and opportunities for young athletes, that they have policies in place to protect them and to ensure that their talents are protected. Lastly, Madam Speaker, I would like to end by quoting the Member of Parliament for Couva South, who said that we are building a future. And I agree, we are. This House is building a future for Trinidad and Tobago. But we must remember that we must focus on the youths. The future of Trinidad and Tobago is on their shoulders. As such, urgent action must be taken to ensure that we do build that future, and that should be done within the next 6 months. We must take steps within the next 6 months. That is not a deadline. That is a sign for us to start walking. We are not stopping at the end of 6 months, no, but we are starting now. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member of Parliament for Naparima.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak. This is no ordinary debate. The matter before us today touches on the very fabric of our society. And as such, I would like to quote the father of our nation, the Right Honorable Dr. Eric Williams said, "The future of our nation is in our children's school bags." And as such, we need to make sure that these bags, they don't carry fear. They don't carry trauma or exploitation caused by human trafficking. Madam Speaker, this motion calls for full-scale reform in 6 months. That is legislation, enforcement, rehabilitation, education, and prevention. And while I wholeheartedly agree with the intent, I must be honest with this House and my burgesses. 6 months is not enough to produce or build a response that works. As Minister of Education, I wish to make it abundantly clear that this government is committed to the implementation of an anti-human trafficking module within the national curriculum. However, curriculum development by its nature is a meticulous process, and rightly so. This must not be misinterpreted as inaction or delay, but rather as a deliberate and responsible approach grounded in the principles of content accuracy, child appropriateness, and training readiness. Permit me to remind this honorable opposition that revisions to the Health and Family Life Education curriculum took over 18 months. This was due to content sensitivity and the need for teacher consultation and parental review. 6 months is not enough. Madam Speaker, when 11-year-old Venezuelan refugee Astrid Saavedra walked into a 4th grade classroom in Trinidad and Tobago, she carried hope in her school bag, hope that this country would not see her as a burden, a criminal, or an illegal element, but rather as a future contributor. Astrid is one of the first migrant children to be allowed into our national education system. She is representative of that bridge between policy and compassion. But you know what she mainly represents? The exception, as over 2,000 migrant children remain outside of our public education system, despite Trinidad and Tobago's commitment under the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Henceforth, as Minister of Education, it is my responsibility. Diego Martin Northeast, you hear that? It's mine. You all did not do it. It's our responsibility, right? To make sure that every child like Astrid has the right to a seat in every classroom that they may occupy, despite the passport that they carry. But in order to do so, we would need to amend legislation in the Education Act. that demands the possession of a certified and translated birth certificate, an immunization record, and a student permit. But it seems to me like the opposition, they lost government and they forget how legislative reform works. Through you, Madam Speaker, let me remind them, legislative reform requires drafting of a new policy, cabinet approval, public stakeholder consultation, and parliamentary debate, all of which may take 9 to 12 months minimum. I say without apology, 6 months is not enough. Madam Speaker, I wish I could snap my finger and say never again to every child at risk. I do, but children deserve more than wishful thinking. They deserve systems that work, they deserve schools that are safe, and they deserve teachers that are trained. So, Madam Speaker, we do agree with the motion, but let us amend the timeline to 12 months so that we can produce a clear and coordinated national plan. If we risk this without proper consultation, then we risk producing a broken response to a broken problem. So if we truly believe that the future of our nation is in our children's school bags, then let's ensure that what they carry is not fear, but hope, protection, and opportunity. I submit and I thank you.
Member of Parliament for Maloney.
Madam Speaker, thank you for this opportunity to speak today. If I may reiterate after the member for St. Anne's East, if the government would only take their attention away from the political blame games, I would gladly lend them my glasses to see that the motion clearly states to take urgent steps within 6 months. We are asking you to simply start working. You do not need to make a 360 turn right away. We just need you to start working. Madam Speaker, human trafficking is not some faraway nightmare. It is a daily threat in Trinidad and Tobago, and even in my constituency. My constituency faces high youth unemployment and gang activity, leaving many people vulnerable. As the member for my neighboring constituency in Tunapuna previously mentioned, the police rescued women and children just last month, young as 16 years old, from alleged traffickers. So we see, if it can happen right there, it can happen here as well. Madam Speaker, despite the importance of this issue, we still face gaps in legislation and enforcement that demand urgent attention. Law enforcement and educators, they lack the training to spot the warning signs. Outdated laws and underfunded survivor support leave many with nowhere to turn. This is a challenge that transcends administrations and calls for a united, bipartisan effort. We are running out of time, Madam Speaker. Every day we delay puts another migrant woman, another child in your constituency, another at-risk youth in danger. This is why urgent reforms within 6 months are not just necessary, they are non-negotiable. I have spoken with teachers in my constituency who are concerned about their lack of training to identify grooming and exploitation. One senior staff member at Maloney Government Primary School said that the teachers are committed, but they feel ill-equipped to handle these issues. So we see our children remain vulnerable because schools do not yet have mandatory anti-trafficking education on digital safety, online predators, or students' rights. Madam Speaker, if you would allow me to quote, Mr. Frederick Douglass said, "Education makes a people easy to lead but difficult to drive, easy to govern but impossible to enslave. A well-educated child is impossible to enslave, Madam Speaker. Therefore, education is our strongest weapon against trafficking." In recent years, we, the opposition's initiative to distribute laptops across Trinidad and Tobago has been a positive step towards inclusion, aligned with SDG 4, which states quality education for all. The digital access can be a powerful tool in teaching awareness, but without a strong anti-trafficking education, the true power of these devices is lost. Reform must begin with the curriculum, Madam Speaker. Dr. Eric Williams said that to educate is to emancipate. The future of the nation rests within the hands of our children, and their education is the key to their freedom. Anti-trafficking education must also cover things like gender equality in line with SDG 5, warning signs, and sexual health and rights. Equipping teachers, parents, and community mentors with the training to spot and identify trafficking risks is critical, especially in constituencies where gang activity and youth vulnerability increases the risks. Programs in the Philippines and the Netherlands show that targeted training works. Trinidad and Tobago must follow suit. Our schools must also be safe havens, promoting peer support, safe reporting, and resilience building activities. Madam Speaker, when survivors are rescued, they must have a real chance to rebuild their lives. The Trafficking in Persons Act has made progress by providing counseling, flexible education, and job training in line with SDG's 8 goals of decent work. But we must do more. We must expand survivor services, increase mental health funding, and create clear pathways to skills and employment. This is about protecting our children, our sisters, our neighbors. The 6-month timeline is urgent, not arbitrary. Delaying only means more lives lost. Madam Speaker, I urge all members to support this motion. Let us act swiftly, with conviction, and united. If not now, when? If not us, then who? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member of Parliament for Labrie.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, imagine you're a Venezuelan national who's been a victim of human trafficking. You walk into, let's say, Port of Spain General Hospital, alone and afraid. But there are no bilingual staff scheduled to work that night. Madam Speaker, the nurses on duty are forced to use Google Translate. Could you imagine how that interaction will go? Nurses are often the first point of contact for victims within a medical scene. If they can't communicate properly, trust is lost. Victims might stay silent, and critical signs of abuse can be missed. A certified interpreter isn't just there to translate words. Madam Deputy Speaker, they bridge fear, isolation, and confusion. This is why this ministry will work closely with the Association of Translators and Interpreters of Trinidad and Tobago to certify staff. However, Madam Speaker, language access alone is not enough. If healthcare workers don't know what to look for, victims can walk in and out of hospitals going unnoticed. Madam Speaker, this is why within the next coming months, this 6 months they keep mentioning, this ministry will implement, in collaboration with international NGOs and multiple interministerial work, to help specialize training, to train staff to recognize subtle signs of trafficking. Therefore, no victim goes unseen. But Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I mentioned something. The situation that I described, it happened at night. And unfortunately, if you needed a psychologist, you're out of luck, because her shift has already ended. Madam Speaker, this government recognizes that trauma doesn't wait for business hours. These victims may arrive at any time, shaken, scared, and unsure of who to trust. A 24/7 psychologist could be the difference between recovery and silence. And Madam Deputy Speaker, it gets worse. You've just received the results for your blood work. You have contracted HIV. Madam Speaker, if your trafficker is convicted, you may receive compensation. But until then, how do you receive the necessary medication you need for survival? Madam Deputy Speaker, this is why this ministry, my ministry, Madam Speaker, will extend CDAP, which is the Chronic Disease Assistance Program, to include treatment for STIs and STDs. So therefore, no victim is left without access to life-saving, long-term medical care simply because they can't afford it. And Madam Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, may I just add to my friend, the Minister of Maloney, she said a 360 turn. Madam Deputy Speaker, that will end us back up where they left off. Madam Speaker, we will not be doing that. And let us not forget, it is under your administration who took away these laptops that you're so claiming for. So thank you so much. But Madam Deputy Speaker, allow me through you to inform members of the opposition and the members of the viewing audience that I, Sydney Bernard, Minister of Health for the Library area, Madam Speaker, as I stand here today with my government, no stone will be left unturned as we fight human trafficking. Madam Speaker, have no fear. Victims have no fear. We are here. We will find you and we will help you under this government. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Member of Parliament for Toko Sangagrandi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a dentist and healthcare professional, I know that behind every smile, there is a story. But for victims of human trafficking, that story is often one of violence, trauma, and pain. Some of it is visible, and some hidden, visible only to those trained to look deeper. Human trafficking is no longer a hidden issue. It is a public health crisis, and this government, we are ready to act. On December 8, 2024, in an article in the Trinidad Express, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service reported that 559 persons were reported missing as of November of that year. And of that, 120 of these persons, they were never found. And these are not just statistics. These are lives lost in silence. And when no bodies are recovered, we must then ask ourselves, where are these persons? Could they have been victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation or forced labor or organ harvesting? And Madam Speaker, the answer is yes. Globally, organ trafficking is rising. And while locally here in Trinidad and Tobago, no confirmed cases has surfaced, we cannot think that is not something that is happening. Because the pattern of disappearances, it warrants concern. It remains a hidden risk here in Trinidad and Tobago. So it begs the question, are we missing something? And that is why this government, Madam Speaker, we support the motion, we support the opposition's motion. We say that victims, they deserve more than the opposition's pseudo-concern. They deserve justice. And we are prepared. We are ready to do the necessary. Madam Speaker, the World Health Organization and the United States Center for Disease Control, they have already implemented a special code within the healthcare system to identify human trafficking. They call it the ICD-10. And what it does, it enables the hospitals to record and track with victims within the various health spaces. Yet here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have not yet implemented such codes. And the reality is, implementing such codes is going to require coordination, it's going to require training, infrastructure, which, Madam Speaker, it requires time. More than the allotted 6 months that have been stipulated by the opposition. But we are not here sitting idly, as the opposition is suggesting. We are not waiting for a perfect time. We are acting now to ensure that our health institutions can recognize trafficking, can recognize it where it hides. Madam Speaker, this is extremely important because in health, we are often the first to see the signs. We see victims, they show up in our clinics with broken bones, broken teeth, bite marks, and the list goes on. And as we have heard from our Minister of Health, the training for the various personnel, it is on the way. Because these are not just the signs, these are pieces of forensic evidence that is going to help to put these traffickers behind bars. Additionally, Madam Speaker, forensic odontology is going to help us to determine the age of undocumented or silent victims, especially minors. And this is important because traffickers often try to falsify the age of the victims in order to avoid harsher penalties. So, Madam Speaker, we are here to say every missing person, they could be a trafficked person. So we're not here today to pass motions simply or to blame, but we are here to ensure that meaningful measures are in place that will save lives, restore dignity, and give survivors a real chance to heal and to rebuild. I thank you.
Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, there's one common thread that unites us all, and that is the fact that human trafficking is a critical issue that must be addressed urgently. As Shadow Minister of Health, as a medical doctor, but more so as a daughter of Trinidad and Tobago, it concerns me, Madam Speaker, that we are sleepwalking through a public health crisis in plain sight. Madam Speaker, permit me to respond to my dear friend, Member of Parliament for Labrie, who made mention that victims of human trafficking lack access to medical care and they only have CDAP. However, HIV medications are free for both Trinidad and Tobago nationals and migrants at the Medical Research Foundation of Trinidad and Tobago. As a matter of fact, the largest HIV treatment center in the English-speaking Caribbean is here in Trinidad and Tobago. Furthermore, my colleagues on the other side seem to contradict themselves. Our Member of Parliament, Minister of State, Health, talked a lot about mental health. But permit me to remind you that Member of Parliament for Point 14 seemed to be a bit tone deaf, referring to guns and loading up the matic and squeezing the trigger when speaking about enacting law enforcement. This is insensitive and irresponsible. Many victims of human trafficking suffer from various mental illnesses, such as depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So we need to be careful, Madam Speaker, about the kind of language we are using in this honorable Parliament. Madam Speaker, if we are to uphold our international commitments and follow Sustainable Development Goal 3, which ensures good health and well-being for all, please, Madam Speaker, we need to include training for our frontline healthcare workers and implement addiction screening in our hospital systems. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, it is understandable that the counter-trafficking unit has done tremendous work. They have provided psychological services to victims, and they have included regional health authorities in working groups to help fight human trafficking. However, more work needs to be done, as many of our healthcare workers are not efficiently trained in identifying the signs of human trafficking. Training is extended to judges, faith-based organizations, but not our healthcare responders. We know that the majority of victims of human trafficking may never be seen in a hospital, as yes, human trafficking does thrive in silence. However, the question we must ask ourselves, Madam Speaker, is who are we missing? The UNODC states that only 1% of victims are ever identified. Isn't that frightening? Isn't that frightening? But, Madam Speaker, we have a duty and a moral responsibility as legislation enforcers to do more where we can. Madam Speaker, I agree with my colleague on providing
multilingual interpreters in emergency rooms. However, they must be trauma-informed in victim-centered care, or else we would be re-traumatizing the patients over and over, and that is not fair to them. Madam Speaker, statistically, 100% of the victims of human trafficking in 2024, according to CTU reports, were Venezuelan, Spanish-speaking migrants. They are a very vulnerable population in Trinidad and Tobago. But we must ask ourselves, if a victim happens to escape from their perpetrator, are we prepared to take care of them now? Not in the next 12 months, Madam Speaker, but can we take care of them now? Let us leave no stone unturned. We need to do better, not in the next 12 months, not in the next year, as soon as possible. It's a matter of priorities. Currently, it is not government versus opposition, but government and opposition versus the problem of human trafficking. Thank you.
Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am Johanna Paris, Minister of Planning and Economic Development. And it seems as though our friends on the other side has mistaken the metaphor loading a Bimatic. That's what you said, right? My sister in security said to load up the policies, not the matic. So I understand that they are not accountable to pulling the trigger for justice. But, Madam Speaker, as I go into my points, as a ministry, our focus is not only on policies, but creating real, lasting systems that help people heal, especially those from trauma like human trafficking. My ministry would be developing a national survivor registry, and this would be a secured registry that focuses on the progress of these survivors from rescue to recovery. This would also help ministries like health, education, and housing support these survivors, and this would prevent re-victimization. This can take 6 to 12 months. Now, most ministries have a needs assessment, but we don't have an integrated needs assessment. We would be doing this by using data from ministries to develop a national map of high-risk zones so that we can send the proper help to these communities. This can take 3 to 6 months. Now, my ministry has the Vision 2030 report, which states what my ministry did in the past and where the country is heading in the future. But we are going to build on Vision 2030 report. We are going to create a public tracker for anti-trafficking that shows real-time progress and transparency for the public. This will take 4 to 6 months. Now, apart from victims and the survivors being rescued, they also need help with economic development. So my ministry will be launching small grants and skills programs, and this will be training or funding for these survivors to start their own business. And this would help them with financial independence and keep them from being vulnerable, from being in vulnerable situations and being re-trafficked. This can take 3 to 4 months. We would also be partnering with NGOs specifically in the arts arena. These partnerships will be doing fashion, dance, visual arts, theater arts, and this can help these survivors heal emotionally while also learning a new skill. This can take 2 to 3 months. And lastly, Madam Speaker, we would be launching a survivor incubator program. This would be a safe space for these survivors to get mentorship, therapy, which is very vital, and business support. So this would be a long-term reintegration and empowerment for these survivors. This can take 8 to 12 months. Proverbs 31 verse 8 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed." I don't intend to just speak up. I want to speak up, build, create, and strengthen the different resources that we have so that we can help these survivors. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Morsika.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, human trafficking is not a distant crisis. It is a present-day plague infecting our communities, affecting and exploiting our women, children, and migrants, and corroding the moral and economic fabric of our home nation. According to the 2023 U.S. Trafficking in Persons report, our nation continues to be ranked on the Tier 2 watch list, indicating that while efforts exist, they still fall short of meeting minimum standards of elimination. This is the reality that we face today, but it is not the future that we have to accept. I envision a Trinidad and Tobago where comprehensive, well-resourced, and coordinated action protects the vulnerable, dismantles trafficking networks, and restores dignity and justice to survivors. I rise to declare unequivocally that Trinidad and Tobago must adopt a whole-of-society, whole-of-government approach which calls for legislative reform and victim-centered approach to eliminate trafficking in all its forms. Human trafficking is too complex for fragmented responses. That is why I call for a whole-of-government approach anchored in the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development to lead an interministerial and anti-trafficking task force to bring together the Ministries of National Security for law enforcement and border control, labor to regulate recruitment and inspect workplaces and employers, women affairs and youth development to protect vulnerable groups, and social development to support victims and help them reintegrate into society. The current Trafficking in Persons Act of 2011 has notable gaps. It lacks robust whistleblower protections and clear legal provisions for digital age trafficking. We must amend this act and close all legal loopholes exploited by recruiters and corrupt officials, enact whistleblower protection to empower citizens and civil servants to report without fear, and introduce stricter sentencing aligned with the UNODC model law on trafficking in persons. Additionally, our national development strategy must tackle both prevention and protection through smart economic planning and stronger frontline institutions. I propose the integrated actions of embedding trafficking indicators into our national SDG and budget report frameworks, launch a national action plan on human trafficking aligned with ILO guidelines to connect job creation, rural development, migration policy, and border control. We should also prioritize youth employment and rural investment, especially in high-risk areas like East Port of Spain, Cedros, and Moruga. Increase funding to the counter-trafficking unit to scale investigations, prosecutions, and victim identification. Furthermore, digital fronts are now the new battleground. Traffickers hunt online, and Trinidad and Tobago must establish a cyber monitoring task force in collaborations with tech giants such as Google to flag grooming and illicit ads, to train youth in digital self-defense. Madam Speaker, we must acknowledge that victims are not just survivors, not just statistics or just another case. Policies must be survivor-centered, which means that victims should have free access to mental health support, legal aid, and vocational training in order for them to have long-term support for the reintegration into society and the labor markets. Lastly, we must saturate the nation with knowledge. Public education must be included in economic planning, as hotlines on school walls and rural transportational hubs, and as well as community centers, can help spread awareness. Campaigns to reach all linguistic groups, partnerships with
faith-based organizations to destigmatize survivors and educate communities can encourage our survivors to reach out to us. Right. Madam Speaker, if we are to be the architects of a just and developed society, then we must design systems that protect our most vulnerable. Human trafficking is not only a human rights issue.
Your time has expired. Member for Kumuto Manzanilla.
Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. As Minister of Finance and the Member of Parliament for Kumuto Manzanilla, I stand here to reaffirm this government's commitment to dismantling the system of exploitation that is human trafficking. This government rejects complicity in all its forms, and my ministry, we are dedicated to addressing the various economic vulnerabilities and informal economies that these traffickers often exploit and profit from. But, Madam Speaker, I reject the notion that our urgency must override responsibility. The Member of Parliament for Mausaka has outlined great initiatives, but we are one step ahead. Let us be honest about the fiscal realities that this government has been left to manage. We are currently experiencing a mid-year deficit of 3.4 billion and a revenue shortfall of almost 485.5 million. The road to economic recovery is long and winding. But to fight human trafficking, this government remains resolute and trust we will stand on business. Through approved supplementary funding, particularly under the development program, we hope to target key ministries that we believe will provide immediate intervention in our fight, particularly the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Public Administration, and the Ministry of Works and Transport. This funding will support a mixture of both ongoing programs and new initiatives outlined by various ministers that will be prioritized for launch in the second half of the fiscal year. But let me be clear, supplementary funding is an interim strategy. But as the Minister of Finance, I could confidently say the 2025-2026 budget cycle will be designed to deliver lasting systemic reform in order to address the various issues plaguing Trinbagonian citizens. Madam Speaker, undoubtedly, one of the roots of human trafficking stems from the vulnerable population being preyed upon through these forced job opportunities and the shadow economies. As the Minister of Public Administration and AI would have said, it begins online. This exploitation continues through bars, spas, and brothels. It must come to an end. To combat this, we will increase our inspections and oversight of the business sector. High-risk establishments like clubs and the other establishments previously mentioned will face inspections for their labor practices. Whistleblower protection will also be reinforced. We want to ensure that employees feel safe reporting any abusive workplaces without fear of further intimidation or reprisal. This government will also enhance the capacity of the Financial Intelligence Unit. We believe that they will be a key weapon in the tracing and disrupting of the illicit financial flows that often fund these trafficking rings. We will utilize them and invest in specialized training and tools with strategic emphasis on the special economic zones that they would have highlighted. And Madam Speaker, the best part is that the work has already begun. We see the importance of deepening CARICOM collaboration. With our recent partnership as well in Montserrat, they will improve cross-border information sharing to help in our fight against human trafficking. Madam Speaker, this government sees that in order to fight human trafficking, our response must be one of a unified national front. We will foster public-private partnerships so that we could get greater assistance in financing and victim support, because we all know that one hand cannot clap. Madam Speaker, we will also utilize and build on successful initiatives such as the Heal, Empower, Rise Counter-Trafficking in Persons project, which was started under the previous administration. That collaboration will remain active and evolve. So yes, Madam Speaker, we support the intent of the motion, but we must build systems that last, protect the vulnerable, punish the guilty. So
as the members of my generation say, the opposition could clock that tea. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Lopino.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in this debate. Madam Speaker, I rise today to support the motion and to contribute from a financial oversight perspective, which is one that is often overlooked but absolutely vital in today's society to dismantle the model of human trafficking. Before delving into the specific gaps within the Human Trafficking Act of 2011, I believe it is important that we establish context. From 2020 onwards, Trinidad and Tobago, like many nations across the globe, faced an unprecedented global pandemic. Madam Speaker, the country faced severe revenue shocks, disruptions in trade, and an urgent need to protect the public health and safety of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. Resources had to be redirected towards life-saving interventions, strengthening the health system, deploying vaccines, and to support the vulnerable households and businesses. As such, certain institutional and legislative reforms, including the related to anti-trafficking unit, could not have been revolved. Madam Speaker, a member of the government would have mentioned that it would cooperate with international partners to meet global standards. Cooperation might be commendable, but meeting global standards is bare minimum, Madam Speaker. As a regional leader, we must aim to set the standards, not merely to follow them. And in this case, international partners themselves, like the Financial Task Action Force, have identified financial oversight and asset recovery as key pillars in fighting trafficking. We can and we must do better, Madam Speaker. The Act lacks any mandate for training financial institutions to recognize and to respond for trafficking-related financial behavior. Allow me to quote, Madam Speaker. According to the Financial Action Task Force in its 2018 report, that was entitled Financial Flows from Human Trafficking, banks and other financial service providers are in a unique position to detect suspicious activity, but only if their staff are properly trained. Madam Speaker, currently there is no national framework requiring or supporting such legislation in Trinidad and Tobago. In closing, I wish to reiterate that it's not a matter of political will or good intentions, because those have long been present. It is a matter of infrastructure, of capacity, and of commitment at a financial level. We cannot fight a multi-million-dollar industry with fragmented resources and with outdated frameworks, Madam Speaker. And if we are serious about ending human trafficking, we must dismantle not only the chains that hold victims, but the bank accounts, the false businesses, and the financial infrastructure that keeps traffickers in business. Madam Speaker, I wish to remind my colleagues on the opposite side that behind every statistic is a human being. And we owe it to them not just to punish, but to prevent, not just to condemn, but to compensate. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for St. Augustine.
Madam Speaker, thank you for recognizing me. Today, I rise not only as the Minister of Energy, but as a citizen of conscience, because it is time we call out human trafficking for what it truly is, a $150 billion global industry built on the backs of the poor, the desperate, and the voiceless. Madam Speaker, as my colleagues would have rightfully highlighted, in our country's first ever conviction, the victim, a 15-year-old girl who dropped out of school to help her mother pay bills. She was not chasing glamour, Madam Speaker. She was chasing a chance to study again. She was promised an education, and instead she was enslaved. Madam Speaker, this single case tells us this. Traffickers exploit hope, and so the best way to fight trafficking is to expand hope. That is why the Ministry of Energy will work closely with government agencies, NGOs, and the private sector to create empowering opportunities for our young women and girls. We will incentivize partnerships between energy companies and communities to offer real skills training, not token programs or one-off workshops, but clear progressive pathways from learning their 2 times table, Madam Speaker, to earning scholarships, to walking into this very industry as petroleum engineers, leaders, and innovators. We will mentor them, equip them, and most importantly, believe in them. But, Madam Speaker, let us shift our gaze from the victim to the perpetrator. The energy sector accounts for 36% of our national GDP and 86% of our exports, according to the IMF report 2023. Imagine, Madam Speaker, if a whiff of trafficking taints this industry. It doesn't just threaten lives. It doesn't just threaten lives. It erodes investor confidence, Madam Speaker. And let me be clear, this ministry and this government will not let that happen. As the Honorable Justice Henderson recently reminded the girls at the Yes Leadership program, traffickers don't always fit a stereotype. They're not always lurking in alleyways or waving $100 bills in brothels. Sometimes they are CEOs, Madam Speaker. They are contractors, well-respected businessmen in crisp white shirts, polished shoes with darker secrets. And yes, some of those white shirts are in the energy industry. Other countries are already taking action. Canada has its recognized recruiters toolkit, and the UK uses the Safe Car Wash app to monitor and protect vulnerable workers. But, Madam Speaker, we will not be left behind. My ministry and this government will work hand in hand with companies to adapt and implement similar awareness tools right here at home. But this is not just about apps and technology, Madam Speaker. It is about hearts and minds. This is why we will expand the employee assistance programs across the energy sector to include anti-trafficking education so that every employee from the oil rig to the executive suite learns how to spot the red flags. EAPs will also provide confidential reporting channels so that silence never becomes complicity. Madam Speaker, detecting and supporting victims is vital, but identifying perpetrators is just as critical to breaking the cycle. And so through you, Madam Speaker, I assure this Parliament and this country, the Ministry of Energy is not a bystander in this fight. We are an economic powerhouse, yes, but we'll also be a moral force, where once this nation relied on us to generate income, now it can rely on us to champion justice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Oh my God. Member for Port of Spain South.
Madam Speaker, members of the House, I rise today not only in opposition, but in duty to the countless citizens of Trinidad and Tobago whose lives are in danger daily due to the systematic neglect of our rural communities. We must confront an uncomfortable truth, Madam Speaker. Inadequate access to basic utilities in rural areas is not just a matter of inconvenience, it is a matter of life, safety, and national responsibility. Madam Speaker, rural communities such as those in Sandy Grande, Mayaro, Moruga, and the North Coast are often undeserved in access to electricity, water, and critically communication devices. When these utilities are unreliable or unavailable, people, particularly women, children, and migrants, become easier targets for human traffickers. Without electricity, streetlights don't work, and entire villages are left in darkness, making surveillance difficult and making it difficult to call for help, report abuse, or online resources. The government cannot claim to be fighting trafficking when it abandons these populations in darkness and silence. Let us turn to data, Madam Speaker. According to Trinidad and Tobago Computer Society 2023 and Statica, 95% of Trinidadians own mobile phones, but only approximately 64.8% have constant internet access as of late 2023. This means more than 1/3 of our population, especially in rural regions, lack reliable internet access. Mobile access means people can own phones, yes, but without stable internet coverage, these phones are as good as paperweight. Emergency hotlines, location sharing, and mobile apps for victim support all rely on internet connectivity. Yet in areas like Matalot or Beach, people climb hills just to send a WhatsApp message. How can we talk about protecting our citizens if they can't even make a phone call? Moreover, Madam Speaker, shelters and safe zones for victims of trafficking and domestic violence depend entirely on utilities, water for hygiene, electricity for safety and lighting, internet for secure communication with law enforcement and NGOs. Yet several safe houses and crisis centers in rural communities report frequent blackouts, water shortage, and lack of proper infrastructure. Before my colleagues on the opposing side say, what have you all done during the 10-year period? We expanded TNTEC's rural grid connection to outlying areas, installed solar panel streetlights in 15 rural communities, and partnered with Judicial to expand the Royal Brandwood rollout. Madam Speaker, this is not just a list of things that need to be said, and we come together today to work as a group and find a solution. It is easy to dismiss electricity, water, and internet as just services. But for many in rural Trinidad and Tobago, the absence of these utilities is the presence of danger. Madam Speaker, without utilities, there is no access. Without access, there is no reporting. Without reporting, there is no justice, Madam Speaker. Let us not wait until another young girl goes missing before we realize that the first line of defense is connectivity. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Chaguanas East.
I thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to address this motion. Today, I rise to bring forth solutions with the intent to mitigate human trafficking, solutions which the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago voted for. The Ministry of Rural and Local Government is one that aims to be on the ground with the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to root out the causes of human trafficking. When we look at human trafficking, we also have to think about the necessities. When there's a lack in necessities, based on previous discussions by my colleagues, you can see that it causes a flip. When citizens do not have basic things like lights, water, lights, water, when they do not have these basic necessities, it opens them up to be praised to traffickers. This is why the Ministry of Rural and Local Government have designed 4 methods to mitigate this, starting with infrastructure. We intend to do more than just build roads or roundabouts. We intend to go into communities and input surveillance cameras. We intend to put in shelters, ensuring that there's clean running water, that there are drains that actually function and instead of flooding out houses. In 2022, there was an article in the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian papers that spoke about the drains being so low that when the water overflowed, it came into the houses, causing it to collapse due to poor infrastructure. So we have designed a program that would allow persons to come in and request housing repair grants and so forth. Right? Moving on to the next point, Madam Speaker, we'll be working alongside community leaders and other relevant agencies who would assist us in preparing and conducting several outreach programs and seminars that would prepare our citizens with the knowledge to prevent themselves from human trafficking attacks. Right. We will also be creating after-school activities and programs for single parents as well as those parents who work long hours. In doing this, the parents can continue to work without having to wonder what is going on with their children because they will be in safe environments, learning as well as furthering their work as well. Right? Madam Speaker, with assistance from these community leaders, we'll be able to post mobile units across the country where citizens can come and make complaints about human trafficking attempts. They can seek information about employment. Now, one of my colleagues on the opposition side would have spoken about employment and how they get affected through false advertising online. Through these mobile units, we intend to take the information of our citizens and filter it through Ministry of Labour and so forth of other ministries that we will be partnered with to assist these persons. So that will mitigate the effects of false advertising being able to lure our citizens. We will also be partnering with the Ministry of Education. Through the Ministry of Education, we will be preparing bi-monthly surveys that will be conducted by both the teachers, the students, and the parents. Through these surveys, we intend to identify all vulnerable areas, vulnerable citizens, as well as allowing them to indicate any persons they are aware of that may be susceptible to human trafficking. We know that our students are very important. The children are our future, as my colleague would have stated, right? So keeping them in school is very important, because when students are out of school, suspended, expelled, we leave them open to praise. Now, we have to ensure that our students stay in school, so now we need to make sure that it's a safe, comforting environment. This is why we are going to ensure that they have all the necessities, such as the lights, the tables, the chairs, books in schools, especially for parents who have the issue in affording it. We will make these things readily available that will help mitigate these problems. Madam Speaker, we have to make sure and identify. Okay.
Member, your time has expired. Member for San Fernando East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to add this to this very important debate. Madam Speaker, it seems to me as though our function is unnecessary. There is opposition even within the government. One member, the member for Naparima, posited that 6 months is too short. Meanwhile, members for Toko Sangre Grande and then Komoto Manzanilla posited that they are acting now. Is only one half of the government working, Madam Speaker? In Trinilingo, one hand, no clap. Furthermore, listening to the member for Chaguanas East, the government intends to do a lot. You are no longer campaigning. Act now. Now, Madam Speaker, it is a common misconception that human trafficking only occurs in the urban areas. And this is, however, no fault of the majority for having this view, because it is oftentimes those cases of human trafficking stemming out from these urban areas. For example, the Guardian newspaper on the 31st of January 2025 has highlighted the area of Chaguanas. Newsday on the 6th of June 2025 has highlighted Tunapuna, and then the Express newspaper once again on the 11th of June 2021 has highlighted Couva and Valsayn as being areas where human trafficking takes place. Madam Speaker, according to city population under the division of Trinidad and Tobago, these are all urban centers. However, I am here to say that human trafficking does not only occur in the urban communities. It also occurs in the rural communities. According to the 2024 Trafficking in Persons report, areas such as Cedros and Icacos were highlighted, and they were listed as entry points for migrants to which they are taken inland into the bars, the brothels. Madam Speaker, furthermore, the Guardian newspaper has highlighted that 3 foreign nationals were charged in Bethel, Tobago. You know what that is, Madam Speaker? It is a rural community. So it is happening. It is just underreported. And if anything at all, that speaks to the weak law enforcement capabilities, which is exactly why we as opposition are here today bringing forward this motion. Now, it is the very nature of the rural areas that allow for human trafficking to remain undetected. They are characterized by poverty, limited accessibility, limited job opportunities, and much more. Now, I want to talk about the poverty aspect. The Daily Express newspaper on the 3rd of May 2021 published an article titled "No Sympathy for Migrant Squatters in Icacos." And it described the crippling conditions faced by these migrants there. And in tandem with this, the Polaris Project has highlighted that those most vulnerable to human trafficking are those facing poverty, having undocumented status and unstable housing. Madam Speaker, this is a reality for many individuals in Trinidad and Tobago, and not necessarily only the migrant population. We are calling upon the government to act in accordance with Sustainable Development Goals 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. Madam Speaker, I also turn to the point where we are asking the government to improve rehabilitation capabilities, especially in the rural communities. Now, I would have been able to locate 7 hospitals and healthcare centers in the Port of Spain area, as well as I looked at the Cedros area and I was only able to locate 1 health center. Madam Speaker, the government might argue that fewer people live there, but that is 1 facility serving 1 large area. Of course, there's going to be difficulty with accessibility. So we reject that logic, Madam Speaker. Equity matters and not just numbers. We are calling upon the government, out of dignity, fairness, and the respect of Trinidad and Tobago's citizens, to act in accordance with Sustainable Development Goals 3, 4, 11, and 16. Now we turn to the Trafficking in Persons Act. It does not take into consideration the rural-specific vulnerabilities. Remember that Bethel case, Madam Speaker? Residents were shocked that human trafficking was occurring right under their nose. And this is because the legislation does not provide the necessary tools for awareness. I'm going to reinforce what the member for Diego Martin Central has said for the sake of time, Madam Speaker. So we are calling on the government to amend the legislation, strengthen the policies, and boost law enforcement and support services. And for the member for Kamuto Manzanilla, don't clock the tea. In fact, look at the clock and assess how many seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, and months that are passing by that you fail to act.
Member, I'm on my legs.
Thank you.
Your time has expired. Member for San Fernando West.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute. But first, through you, let me address the opposition. I believe you have misunderstood where our ministries speak about different time frames. We intend to attack low-hanging fruit while also implementing long-term plans, something you are unaware of. I rise today as the Minister of Agriculture and the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West to address an issue that strikes the heart of our nation's commitment to human dignity, decent work, and the rule of law, the persistent crime of human trafficking. While many may think that human trafficking only occurs in the dark corners of our city, however, the reality is that human trafficking can even occur in our fertile fields and calm coastal waters. Our own 2023 U.S. in-persons trafficking report confirms what we have long suspected, that our migrant workers, particularly our Venezuelan brothers and sisters, are being trafficked into our nation. They are tricked with the promises of decent wages and opportunity. Instead, they are met with forced labor, their travel documents are seized, and the threat of deportation is used as a tool of coercion. In 2020, there was a raid conducted in central Trinidad, which revealed Venezuelan migrants being forced to work on fields and fishing vessels with constant threats and surveillance. This is a grim reminder that human trafficking is not an abstract problem, but a lived reality for far too many people. Madam Speaker, I take this personally, as our sector should be synonymous with growth, nourishment, and dignity, not exploitation. It is our duty to ensure that all workers, whether local or migrant, is free from fear and protected by the law. To that end, I intend to firstly strengthen labor inspections. We must expand our reach to the Labor Inspectorate Division in collaboration with the Counter-Trafficking Unit to train persons to conduct inspections of farms, fishing vessels, and communities where abuse is likely to remain hidden. Secondly, we will empower our farmers and recruiters. Many farmers are honest and decent people who simply lack the knowledge to identify human trafficking. We will conduct nationwide awareness campaigns, building on the work done by the Ministry of Immigration to spot red flags and report them safely. Thirdly, we will protect our migrant workers by creating a safe legal path backed by clear contracts, fair wages, and access to a compliant mechanism without fear of deportation, as well as the introduction of an anonymous hotline where workers can report abuse safely without the fear of their workers. And lastly, we will promote transparency. We will collaborate with civil societies, international bodies, and our communities to shed light on this crime. Together, we will break the silence that these traffickers depend on. Madam Speaker, agriculture is the backbone of our food security and rural development, but it must also be the bedrock of integrity and dignity for humans. Let it be known from the Parliament to the fields that human trafficking will not be tolerated in Trinidad and Tobago. Together, we will stand and say, not our communities, not our fields, and not our waters. We are planting modern seeds. We are planting justice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for acknowledging me. And as we continue to discuss on this important topic today, Madam Speaker, of human trafficking, the government have been playing wholly a blame game. Right, Madam Speaker? Let me say the Member of Parliament for La Hakata Talparo said, we have the heart, but we lack the resource. Madam Speaker, if you truly have a heart, you will find the resources. She then proceeded to say that when we lack the resource, they turn a blind eye. Madam Speaker, when they choose to turn a blind eye, the victims will lose an eye. The member for Labre said, when we here have no fear. Have fear when, Madam Speaker, when they turn a blind eye? According to the Newsday article by Laurel V. Williams on Sunday, 6th of March, 2022, 102 human trafficking victims were rescued. Madam Speaker, it states that they were exploited in forced prostitution and labor. As we all know, forced labor is one of the most common forms of human trafficking in the agricultural sector. And as the Shadow Minister of Agriculture, Madam Speaker, I say our victims are our priority. As I continue, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Agriculture said that they have transparency. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago lack regulation and transparency because our farms are rarely inspected, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this creates a significant challenge in overcoming this crime. Madam Speaker, according to the International Labour Organization report in 2021, entitled Inspection and Agriculture Work, states that in the rural and agricultural sector, inspections are difficult to conduct due to the lack of resources and that they are understaffed. They don't have enough staff to reach farms. Madam Speaker, if this isn't a sign of neglect, then I don't know what is. Madam Speaker, as a farmer myself, it's disheartening to see that our women in agriculture is underrepresented and not respected. Madam Speaker, I know what it is to go out there in the hot sun and work wholly. I can't even imagine our victims doing that with no pay. Madam Speaker, as a young farmer in the industry, I rise today with not only soil on my hands, but a heavy, disheartened heart of injustice, because I know while I planting to feed the nation, in the shadows of our farm and industry, human trafficking is thriving. Madam Speaker, agriculture is a high-risk industry, aligning with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2, 8, 12, and 16. As a country, as a nation, we should strive for zero hunger. We should strive for economic growth, peace, and justice. Imagine being promised a job to feed your family, to only end up on a farm, debt, in bondage, with no voice, no pay, and no way out. Madam Speaker, what does it say about us if the food that we eat is harvested by enslaved hands? Madam Speaker, as a youth leader and a daughter of the soil, I say agriculture must feed, not exploit. It must uplift, not enslave. And as a nation, at Trinidad and Tobago, we should come together and work. So I tell the government through you, Let us work together and not against each other. I thank you.
Member for Barataria Sawa.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I speak through you, Madam Speaker, that my friend here for St. Anne's East said that we must start walking. But, Madam Speaker, what was the opposition walking with before? Delusion? Now they want us to fix their mess, and can I please say in layman terms, Dorashri. As the Minister of Culture, Trade and Tourism, I clearly say that we cannot promote freedom in the form of carnival and as a business while allowing exploitation to fester in the background. I would like to highlight Carnival's role in human trafficking. During Carnival season, thousands of tourists arrive, some seeking sex services. This demand creates the opportunity for traffickers to lure and exploit women and sometimes men into prostitution. According to the U.S. State Department Trafficking in Persons Tip Report 2023, it was recorded that women and girls from Venezuela, Colombia, Guyana, and the Dominican Republic are subjected to sex trafficking in brothels and clubs and are often lured by offers of legitimate employment. This confirms what we are seeing on the ground. Foreign nationals being deceived with job opportunities only to be trapped in a cycle of abuse. This ministry is planning to create campaigns to bring awareness to this issue in high-traffic tourist areas such as Piaco International Airport, Arapita Avenue, Maracas Beach. We are dedicated to creating slogans that would stick with people. For example, see it, speak it, stop it. Prevent human trafficking now. But Madam Speaker, let me just say that traffickers really good at sweet talk, you know. 1 minute is, sweet, I have a job for you. Next minute is, give me a passport and don't ask me nothing. Our ministry is dedicated to creating policy and strengthening the ones that we already have. For example, if it is you want to be a band leader, promoter, or any frontline staff, you have to go through thorough screening with us. This screening would include applications for certificate of good character, human trafficking awareness training. Your business must be registered. Your financials before and after Carnival must be submitted into us. And the employees who you decide to hire during Carnival season, their information must be in our databases. According to the CSO reports, the survey for departing visitors for Carnival season, it was recorded that in this year alone, 34,194 tourists would have visited Trinidad for Carnival season. Imagine that, all these people in our country at one given time. My ministry recognizes that the chaos of Carnival makes detection harder. With thick crowds and stretched police presence, it is harder to detect these signs. And that is why we will be partnering with our Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Social Development that will help patrol these events and give support to where it's needed. I want to mention an article published by Trinidad Express newspaper entitled Bajan Man Missing Since Carnival and Relatives Worried, written by J.C. Gonzalez in March 29, 2017, where Kenville Clark, who traveled from Barbados for Carnival, disappeared in the bustle of Carnival activities. And let me be clear that Carnival is not the problem. Our ministry is ready to act, not just with words, but with policies, because stories like Mr. Clark's and the Venezuelan woman drive our motivation to implement proper vetting, interministerial coordination. And let me be clear, right, that Carnival is a celebration of who we are, and we cannot sit and allow these traffickers to disrupt our home during our country's most vulnerable time of the year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Tobago East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Not enough time, not enough time, not enough time. The words from the government spoken like a broken record. Tell that to the children in chains. Tell that to them that being sexually exploited. Tell them to the ones who are scared and in tears. Let me be very clear. This is not just a debate topic. It is a matter of national urgency. The longer we delay action and awareness, the deeper we allow human trafficking to embed itself into our tourism sector, our economy, and our national image. Firstly, tourism spaces are being exploited. Hotels, guest houses, and private renters have become safe havens for traffickers. Central Trinidad, particularly Conopia and Port of Spain, are known hotspots. High visitor turnover and limiting monitoring allows human traffickers to operate undetected, especially during large events like Carnival. According to Alana Wheeler, former CTU director, in an interview with the TNT Guardian in 2023, traffickers earn up to $6,500 US per adult victim and $9,700 US per child monthly. Yet inspections remain rare, policies remain weak, and the government's silence has been far louder than any outcry. Secondly, migrants and informal workers are left unprotected. From 2013 to 2024, 99% of trafficking victims were of foreign national, mostly Venezuelans, according to the Newsday TT 2024. Many work in tourism without contracts or protection, are paid under the table, and are fearful of retaliation. Despite 102 victims being rescued and 63 traffickers charged, most cases remain hidden. This is modern-day slavery, made possible by weak labor enforcement. Thirdly, our economy and global image is at risk. Tobago's economy is significantly reliant on our tourism, with the sector contributing approximately 10% of the national GDP raised by Tobago alone, and tourism accounting for 25% of employment in Tobago. Lastly, human trafficking threatens trade and economic stability. This is a trade risk. Countries marked as trafficking hubs often face reduced investor confidence, export restrictions, and damaged reputation in global markets. Under the U.S. Trafficking Victims Protection Act, countries ranked Tier 3 risk losing trade-related aid and benefits. We may be Tier 2 now, but failure to act could drag us background. So I ask the government, what is the cause of silence? My apologies, Madam Speaker, for my outburst, but the cries of trafficking victims aren't loud enough for the government to hear. You are safe, your loved ones are safe, but women and children are being trafficked, migrants are being trafficked, men are being trafficked, and still some sit here and argue against this motion? Let me close with a saying from Tobago. Today for me, tomorrow for you. Because if we don't act now, the consequences won't just find us, they'll define us. Thank you.
Members, may I remind you of Standing Order 48.5, which says that a member shall be referred to in the House by reference to his constituency or to his official portfolio. You, he, or she is not accepted. Please refer to the members by their official portfolio. Prime Minister and Member for Saparia.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity for letting me address this honorable House. The question from the opposition is ringing in my ears, if not now, then when? So I must ask them, if not any time over the past 10 years, then when? And we must commend them for raising this issue to our government finally capable of addressing the problem and making real change. We must take a moment to remember those for whom this change is coming too late and those who have suffered under the failed systems put in place by the last government. To the opposition, I say, the people have now given us the mandate, so we will be the government that you have failed to be. This is a silent war waged against our women, our children, our migrant communities. And after 10 years under your leadership, we remain in Tier 2, which simply says that the opposition did not do enough. So I am standing here, united across ministries, to say that enough is enough and meaningful change will now be made. 80% of identified trafficking victims are migrant women, primarily Venezuelan. 1 in every 3 victims is a child. 90% of these cases are sexual exploitation, and this is happening under our noses. My ministers have been working across every sector to confront this crisis head-on. My Attorney General, advancing key legal reforms, amending the Trafficking in Persons Act, introducing online judicial warrants, and cracking down on law enforcement complicity, because corruption will not be tolerated under our ranks. My ministers of public administration and AI will deploy artificial intelligence to enhance surveillance, to detect trafficking patterns, to support victims, because technology must protect, not prey. Women Affairs has highlighted the gendered nature of this issue, and 48% of regional cases of human trafficking has involved social media, which puts our young women and young girls, they are facing unprecedented digital threats. This is gender-based violence, and it must be treated as such. Our Minister of Planning has proposed data-driven national strategies, mapping high-risk zones and launching pilot projects in vulnerable communities. Youth and Sport Affairs has rang the alarm on youth idleness and proposed the removal of ID barriers for immigrant children and proposed national awareness campaigns to reach high-risk groups. Education has proposed school-based screening, digital safety education, and inclusive access to classrooms, while agriculture has exposed how these fake job offers are luring women into human trafficking. So stricter regulations and ethical recruitment practices must be pursued. This is not the fight of one ministry. Under this government, we are not just responding, we are rebuilding a broken system to protect our vulnerable. So through you, Madam Speaker, allow me to address the nation of Trinidad and Tobago and say that we must now call human trafficking what it is, a system of violence, of exploitation and abuse, and victims are made to feel invisible. And when their government remains silent, just as how the opposition has remained silent for the past 10 years, failing to amend legislation and put laws in place to protect our vulnerable, that silence became complicity. Through comprehensive assessment done by my government, Madam Speaker, I know that we can support this motion, but let me be clear, 6 months is risking fragmented efforts and shallow impact. This 9 months that we are talking about that my ministers need, this is not for delay, it is for depth. It is to ensure that we act forcefully, that we act decisively, and that we act efficiently. To the nation, when you silence a woman, you are not just silencing her, you are silencing generations. A mother's lullaby, a teacher's voice, and a leader's strength. Human trafficking is a national emergency, fracturing families, shattering communities. So yes, this government is acting now, but change will not be seen unless we stand as a united front, because this is not somebody else's daughter. This is Trinidad and Tobago's daughter. So we will not continue to let this be the fate of our daughters, our mothers, our sisters, our children. Madam Speaker, this government rises today not only in debate, but in duty, and we will not fail the women and children who depend on us for justice, for safety, and for dignity. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Leader of the Opposition and Member for Arima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The blue ribbon is an internationally recognized symbol of support for cases of human trafficking and a commitment to raising awareness for these cases. However, today we don't only stand upon a legacy of symbolism, we stand upon a legacy of hard work. Our recommendations today have leveraged the work of the counter-trafficking unit over the last 10 years, as well as collaboration across national, regional, and international organizations for the benefit of victims within Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, it is so disheartening that today within this presentation, there has been a trend of a lack of research, panache, and sensitivities from the government bench. The member for Labre would have stated that there were no services available for victims to access HIV services, whereas our Shadow Minister of Health, with simple research, would have identified that medications and services are available for free at the Medical Research Foundation for migrants. Secondly, the MP for Point Fortin would have used some insensitive and violent metaphors to describe the approach that the government bench wants to make. And there was a further justification by the MP for Chaguanas West. This is inappropriate when discussing cases of such sensitivity, such as human trafficking. The MP for Faizabad, unaware of the difference between a Tier 2 and a Tier 2 watch list status. We have been upgraded to Tier 2 a while now. MP for Princestown, unaware that we have 2 convictions and not only 1. The government has seemed to be so ill-prepared for this presentation today. And it is disheartening that this strategy today has been one of finger-pointing and not one of collaboration on how we can build on the work done within the past 9 years to move forward, to build on previous successes and lessons learned. Madam Speaker, it seems like the government fails to realize that they are now in government. They were in opposition for 10 years. And they're coming here and pointing fingers for the entire day, saying that you were in government for 10 years. What have you done? What have you done? Now we're saying you're in government now. What are you going to do? The government has been mentioning tackling low-hanging fruit. What is low-hanging fruit for our victims? Our victims want health care. They want rehabilitation. They want justice and they want safety. Where is the low-hanging fruit? We need to take the steps. There seems to be a misunderstanding of the motion. We're not asking for a perfect solution within 6 months. We're asking that you take the steps to get there. We're asking you to start walking. So we call upon the government today. We would have made several recommendations. A recommendation to decentralize our services that rehabilitate and support victims, as well as the services for reporting of exploitation. To lead the charge against public officer complicity, which is driving the human trafficking sector within Trinidad and Tobago. We're asking you to equip our emergency services, such as our hospitals, as well as our police officers, to have translators in these places available for victims who may be reporting cases of exploitation. We need to seal our porous borders. If we don't seal our borders, we will continue to have human trafficking within our country. We're asking for strengthening of the CTU, for the provision of additional resources, staff, personnel, as well as funds to support their work. We need to destabilize the funds and the finances that drive human traffickers within our region. And we need a media act that protects our victims from falling prey to human traffickers. The government says that they can't do something within 6 months. The Children Life Fund bill was passed within less than 6 months. Why can't we do this for human trafficking? So I would like to outline the important parts of the motion one more time, because it seems like the government has failed to do so. We are asking you to take the steps within 6 months to collaborate for the greater good of not only Trinidadian citizens, but for the global citizens, because it's not only our citizens in Trinidad that are affected by human trafficking. And our ultimate vision is for the eradication of human trafficking. So past 6 months, past 1 year, past 10 years, we want to transform the mindset of people globally, that women will no longer be seen as a resource for exploitation. And we can achieve this through education and the recommendations that we would have made today. We state one more time that a vote in support of this motion is a vote in support of protecting the vulnerable in our society. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is, Be it resolved that the government take urgent steps within the next 6 months to strengthen policies, amend legislation, and improve law enforcement and rehabilitation capabilities to address the issue of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. The motion is approved. Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House now do adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Honourable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.
Give it to her.
I'm just here to say a few words on behalf of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and to give some context to our viewing public as to what just occurred today. So this is the second year of the YES Leadership Program, which is a program developed in conjunction with the Women Parliamentarians of Trinidad and Tobago, an apolitical group for current and past women parliamentarians. So these young ladies who would have just debated on a motion to improve policies, legislation on human trafficking have been in training since April and would have been trained in parliamentary procedure, etiquette, research skills, debating, AI, and the like. So it's been a few weeks of preparation and training, culminating in today's simulation of a parliamentary sitting, which is why it's done in collaboration with the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago to give the participants the experience of what a real-life debate
feels like. Now, some persons may have noticed that the constituencies are a little different, and that's only because of the number of participants. It's more than what we have in the usual parliament. Parliamentarians, we have 41 constituencies, and we have more than 41 participants, so some of the constituents had to be split, in case anyone was wondering. And of course, we had some unique ministries, like the Ministry of Migrant Affairs, right, to suit the topic of the motion, which is on human trafficking. So I'm sure you all feel very proud, very relieved. You don't have to hear from me again for a while, but I do want to congratulate all of you for a job well done. The debate did have a lot of research and statistics, references to the human trafficking report, quotations, and so we know you all spent a lot of time preparing and getting yourselves ready for today. You all addressed very smartly, like parliamentarians too, so congratulations on that. You all looked the part, you all sounded great, and so we now invite you to join us for a short reception where you'll receive your certificates, and the Women Parliamentarians group will have a few words for you as well. But congratulations again. Thank you for being a great group of young women, our future leaders, our change makers. We hope to see some of you in these halls in the years to come, perhaps. I may be long gone, but the point of the program is to encourage participation at national leadership. So we do want to encourage those of you who are already in national leadership to continue, and those of you who are not yet to please use the opportunities that come from this program to get yourself involved as young women leaders. We need more of you around, okay? So thank you so much. We're going to take a photo of the group of you, and then we will take you all down to the reception, okay? So